A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and dedicated advocates for climate action. A very warm welcome to each of you as we're back for the ninth and final day. It is an honor to stand before you as your MC for this remarkable gathering. In collaboration with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku, Climate Governance Malaysia proudly hosts Malaysian support for COP29, a virtual forum bringing together thought leaders, innovators, and experts dedicated to advancing impactful climate solutions. This two-week program reflects the Malaysia Pavilion's daily themes, delving into sustainability and reinforcing Malaysia's commitment to a resilient and sustainable future. Today's theme is Malaysia's Diverse Voices, all for sustainability. Malaysia is leading climate action, empowering future generations and amplifying the voices of indigenous and marginalized communities in climate strategies. By intertwining youth empowerment, community resilience, and environmental stewardship, Malaysia aims for a more equitable and sustainable future, ensuring every voice contributes to the global fight against climate change. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Theseira, esteemed Director of Climate Governance Malaysia, to share his insights on COP29, along with Ms. Nat Pan, Editor of ESG at The Edge Malaysia. Over to you, Dr. Gary.
Thank you very much, Ariffin, and a very good morning, everyone. Once again, it's a pleasure to be with you on this, the last day of COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. We can probably expect that the closing hours of the COP are extremely frantic ones as parties scramble to secure as many agreements as they can to be able to adopt as many of the decisions as possible. We are in the second week, the high-level segment. This means that ministers are involved. And it's not surprising, therefore, that sometimes we enter a bit of a dark period from a media standpoint, because basically all the delegates are working as hard as they can around the clock, locked up in their rooms, and we don't normally get any feedback from the delegates until the closing plenary begins. Now, as usual, what I'll do is talk a little bit about what's going on at the COP, so that listeners have a sense of what things are like at that end, and how things might be progressing at the Malaysia Pavilion. Also a little bit about where we go from here, because even as we talk about the ending of this COP, we already are looking at what might be potential agenda items that might be carried to the next COP. As usual, if you scan the news coming out, there's been a lot of commentary on the dire situation that some groups of countries find themselves in, particularly the small island developing states and the least developed countries. The interviews with delegates from these countries indicate that they actually do feel very marginalized, left out, that somehow the COP is not delivering the means of implementation that they need, nor anything to help them with their ability to manage loss and damage or adaptation. By their reckoning, the small island developing states need something like $40 billion annually to address climate change effectively. For the least developed countries, this value is about 220 billion. So altogether, it's about 260 billion, or approaching 300 billion, which is about the 0.3 of the 1.3 trillion dollars that the Group of 77 in China have indicated that are needed as a minimum, up from the floor of 100 billion a year that was pledged at Copenhagen. Now, another key concern for these countries as we come into the closing hours of the COP is, what happens to the agenda items that parties are not able to agree to. And I'm sure that some of you have that question in your mind as well. If any agenda item can't reach a consensus in terms of agreement, then it could be carried over into the next COP. And at the closing plenary, the agenda items will be divided into all of those that were resolved and those that weren't resolved. And as many fear, some of these agenda items might be carried over into the next COP. Among these, of course, the NCQG and some of the issues related to adaptation. Perhaps some of the work plans also might be carried over. The danger or the fear at the start of the COP, if you recall, is that some were very, very concerned that Baku might become a placeholder COP as opposed to the finance COP. If we cannot achieve agreement on finance, then de facto, this will have become a kind of placeholder COP, and the hard decisions on finance kicked forward or moved over to the upcoming COP in Brazil next year. All right. So with that out of the way, then let me welcome our guest this morning. Our guest this morning is Nat Anzayun. She is an editor with The Edge, and her specialty is the area of ESG, sustainability. She covers Malaysia as well as parts of Southeast Asia. Welcome, Nat, and very good morning to you.
Morning, Dr. Gary.
Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on. When we think about the theme for this final day at the Malaysia Pavilion, it's Malaysia's diverse voices, all for sustainability. Now, we know that sustainability is a very, very broad concept. And climate is a part of that, and it's part of the environmental pillar, as it were, of sustainability. In terms of this kind of diversity, I mean, there's so much diversity in Malaysia in so many different areas. I mean, we have our biological diversity. We are among the top 17 most biodiverse countries in the world. This biodiversity stems, of course, from the diversity of our ecosystems. We have everything from montane ecosystems all the way down to mangrove and seagrass, plus everything in between. We host more than 170,000 species of flora and fauna. And in terms of resources, the country is very diverse as well. And this leads to a whole range of diverse economic activities: mining, agriculture, plantations, manufacturing, and industry. And the distribution of these resources is also not uniform. Of course, Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah, and Sarawak. But with the historical development of the country, we find that we have different greenhouse gas emissions profiles for different parts of the country, different jurisdictions. We find that some states are still very, very heavily forested, others are predominantly settlements, others are predominantly agriculture. We find some states have 2 or more coal-fired power plants, others have none. Some states have very large hydroelectric facilities, others have none. The population, the income distribution, all varies. We have large urban centers that are large consumers of energy and responsible for a lot of emissions, particularly from building use as well as transportation. But other states continue to be largely covered with forest or with tree crops. Fortunately, we do have a legacy of forest reserves. These have continued to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, about 100 million tons a year. But like our other resources, these forests are not distributed equally. Some jurisdictions, like state of Malacca, for example, just barely have 5,000 hectares of forest reserves. But states like Sabah, on the other hand, have 3.5 million hectares of forest reserves. And in fact, Sabah continues to be a net sink. In other words, removing more carbon from the atmosphere than all the residents of Sabah emit. At the same time, though, the issue is that Sabah remains one of the states that has one of the highest rates of poverty. So, in your experience as an editor working with ESG topics in this sustainability area, we hear that our diversity, regardless of what we're talking about, is the reason for our national resilience. Would you agree with that statement? Would you disagree with it? You speak to policymakers, you speak to decision makers, you speak to youth and all segments of the population. Do you think this is a true statement?
I think if we go by the data, yes, like our forest carbon sink is very important for us. It was only at like 2004 that we became net emitters, right? Our carbon sink could not handle all the emissions that we are having. But to be honest, when I talk to a lot of people, I don't know if it's a Malaysian thing to be cynical, but oftentimes I think what you see on the ground and what you see in terms of the data can be very different. So, and of course, when you're on the ground, you don't see all the forest in the country, right? So if you live in KL, you won't see the forest in Sabah or Sarawak. But even in Sarawak, if you stay in a certain area in Sarawak, you might see mainly logging instead of a forest reserve. So I think when I speak to a lot of people, oftentimes they will say, oh, these are just numbers. It's not true. Um, I hear a lot of people telling me that, the government says that there's no more logging, but I still see deforestation happening. So yeah, I think it is a huge asset, but perhaps more could be done to clarify these numbers, these terms, and yeah, I'm sure there are good things being done, but there are also bad things happening, right? So I think that some kind of clarity is needed on that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is true. I mean, we are only able to see so much from a highway or a train. We can see a little bit more from aircraft, and of course, if we have access to Landsat imagery, drones, and etc., we will have far more data with which to work. And I think this is very, very important to build confidence, especially as the world is now putting more and more focus on the broader concept of overall sustainability. And we know that climate and the environment, land use, etc., are one of the pillars of sustainability, economic and social being the other two. But this word, sustainability, kelestarian, kemampanan, do you think this is something that the average person on the street in Malaysia has a sufficient understanding of? Or are Malaysians just so busy with trying to, cari rezeki and keeping food on the table, sending kids to school, etc., that it's something of an afterthought. It's heard on the news once in a while. Once in a while there may be demonstrations. Once in a while there may be blockades. But once it's out of the news, it's sort of out of mind. How do you see the Malaysian population associating with this word? Is it something that's growing, something that's stable, or are we still way back in the dark ages?
I don't think more and more people now know what sustainability means. But I personally think that perhaps it's not the most important word for us to make it very common among the people, because if you ask people, of course, bread and butter issues are more important, and I think we cannot fault the people for that. But they will know things when you talk about climate, not even climate change actually, but flooding, unpredictable weather, flooding, droughts, hot weather. These are the things that they know. And I think linking climate change it's quite an obvious term as well, and people understand it. And but I think when we say the word sustainability, it becomes like a very lofty term, like an ideal. Whereas when you use the words climate change and link it to the impacts that they are personally feeling, then they suddenly realize that, oh, oh wait, so this has something to do with me, with my business as well. Sustainability is not something I'm supposed to do for, let's say, I mean, you are, but in a sense, it's not just for ethical reasons. It actually will cause my assets to be destroyed. Like it affects my financial bottom lines. Um, yeah, so I think maybe sustainability is not the best the priority to be popularized, I guess.
Okay, and maybe the word sustainability is too broad. I mean, after all, you yourself deal with the slightly narrower ESG scope, which is, we know it's for valuation, for investment, etc. But even within our country, there are different demographies. Is the climate and the broader sustainability something that is better understood by certain demographies than others? Is it a function of leisure? I mean, in my neighborhood, for example, I find it the most active people environmentally are actually retirees. Not so much kids who are just trying to make it through a school and score A's. Do you think that this has different levels of buy-in and different levels of participation from these various demographies?
That's a good point. I think definitely so. I mean, the youth that I speak to, again, depending on what population of youth, but since I'm in Klang Valley, the youth know about it. Whether they actually take action depends. I think in terms of what you say, the retirees, yeah, like a lot of I volunteer a fair bit with NGOs, and usually it's the retirees, all the people who are really taking action to make a difference. Um, but I still think for the majority, like if they're not interested, they're just not interested. Like they know the word sustainability, they know the words climate change. This is in Klang Valley, of course. But do they change their behaviors? No, actually, I think the awareness has not reached action.
Mm. Yesterday on a radio station, of course, yesterday was, if you missed it, yesterday was Children's Day. It was a bit surreal because my son happens to be away at camp, but Children's Day without children in the house felt a bit strange. But there were groups of children being interviewed, and they seemed very plugged in to some of the issues. There was one particular group of children that formed a bit of an environmental NGO in their school, and they were treated, for example, to a tour of a water treatment plant, where they were able to appreciate, how difficult it is to begin with dirty, water, raw water, and need to have it treated, and then thereafter stored and piped to all the homes. So they seemed to understand, at least at a rudimentary level, some of the important principles that need to be in place to ensure that our environment continues to supply these resources, and that we ourselves don't make them so fouled that they become impossible to use. Um, Perhaps you may not speak to enough people to have a sense of how all of Malaysia's youth you've already mentioned some of these. You mentioned cynicism. You've mentioned just kind of agnostic, being too busy to do it. For those who are involved, those who do understand and who are taking action, what is the sentiment there? Is it a kind of cautious hopefulness? Is it kind of despair? Is it anxiety? How do you see this driving them forward? Do you think it motivates them further? Do you think that they will become good advocates? Even to their parents and to other
Well, okay.
generations, not just their
Actually,
siblings.
when you talk about that, I have interviewed a fair bit of like corporate leaders, and they do tell me that their children nag them at home
Okay,
to
okay.
recycle, and
Mm,
especially to recycle. I think that's the main one.
mm,
So there's some that's working. That's working, I think. So yeah, I guess I personally don't. I have not interacted that much with the smaller kids. I guess the Gen Alpha. But hearing stories from these corporate leaders, I guess they do work well. I think. But before this, when I was liaising more with the youth, they but these are the youth who are aware of this matter.
mm,
They are very knowledgeable, and I think it's a sense of, I feel it myself as well, a sense of anxiety almost, of this is what the science is saying, and we are starting to see the impact in recent years, especially. And what does this mean for their future? What does this mean for their future? Um, but in a sense, not much can be done unless there is systemic change. And it's so
mm,
difficult to push for systemic change. And I think there's where the sense of despair and anxiety comes in. But they're still pushing for it, which I think is very refreshing and inspiring, especially seeing the kids as well, knowing about this and not yet jaded. And I think that gives us a
yeah.
lot of um I guess inspiration to move forward. I've definitely heard a lot from corporate leaders sometimes talking about their children, bringing up their children as the reason why they're pushing for sustainability within their
Good,
companies,
good.
because they see that they want their children to be able to live in a safe environment. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Um, easily nowadays have more media. I mean, we are more connected than we have ever been as a civilization. And yet there are still pockets of people who are not aware, may not understand. Where do you think our blind spots are? Is it in the education system? Are we not using the correct apps? You're not using the correct platforms? How do we get this message out, particularly to those who are not already in the choir, as it were? So that we can bring everyone on the same footing, at the same
Mhm.
level of understanding, and then I think we might find that things are easier to move. Where do you think we're going on this? Is it maybe it's too much media? I don't know. What's
I
your
think.
take?
Oh, you think it's too much for you? Okay. Maybe. Okay, I have two views. I think one, the more common one is probably, education, social media. And I do think that getting children, for example, when you say bringing them to water treatment plant, I think that's great.
Mhm,
Personally, when I started volunteering, when I was joining tree planting or even trail cleanups, beach cleanups, seeing the amount of trash with my bare eyes and collecting it really left a very visceral impression. And I think for
mhm,
children, that could be something as well. Um, Perhaps the less popular opinion might be that I think awareness can only do so much. I think we need to have systemic change. Like if we made recycling so easy,
mhm,
if we designed our products to already use less materials in the first place, or that we made um rental of, let's say, Tupperwares or whatnot very, very simple, then I think people have no choice but to be sustainable. And I think that you can create way more change with that compared to just raising awareness. But of course,
mhm.
that's more difficult to do as well.
Yeah, we have some input from our audience, listeners, and this has come through the chat. A lot of people feel like their individual contribution will not make a difference, seeing how big the problem is. How do we get people to be personally invested in climate change? That's the question. Would you like to take that? You can see it if you click on the chat.
Yeah, I see it too. You
Mm,
know, I recently attended the climate fest workshop, and they had like this
mhm,
the saying about how our average carbon emissions per person should be like 2 tons, right? And they actually showed like, okay, which actions you take can reduce the most emissions
mm,
for an individual. So it includes things like eating beef, or like flying
mhm.
to Dubai, two-way flight to Dubai, or driving how many like 12 kilometers per
Mm,
day, things like
mm,
that. And then you could see how much carbon emissions you could save just by doing that, just by one person.
mhm,
And I
mhm,
think that gave a very clear message of like, no, actually, you think it does not make a difference, but it does make a difference. Like, if you don't eat beef, or if you don't drive 12 km every single day. It does make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a very unique perspective, and unfortunately, not enough of us, have the ability to visit a water treatment plant or visit a landfill, or visit a solar farm even. I've even had a chance to visit a factory that manufactures solar panels. I think all of these things might be very useful experiences. For national service, I think something actually very useful would be if people would be required to spend, young people, spend a little bit of time actually sorting through recycling. Because I think that
That's a
although
good
we have
idea.
recycling programs, I don't think we recycle thoughtfully and considerately enough. In developed countries, of course, the recycling is sorted by automated. It's just lasers and things by density, and things like that. So it's all automated by machinery. But in many developing countries, the sorting is done by hand. People actually have to wear gloves and go through it. And I think that until you have to do that yourself, it's very difficult to convince you that you do need to make sure recycling is clean. It's not dangerous. There's no broken glass. There are no sharp metal edges, and all these things that and it just, I think, elevates all of Malaysian society to a different level when we have the capacity to consider the safety of others, even as we try to do the right thing. I know that we are running out of time. Sorry, you want to say something?
I don't know, just real quick, it's like, even my friends who traveled to Japan or South Korea, and the way they even tourists have to separate their trash there for the Airbnb, and they come back with very different insights, and they were sharing with me and promised that if I do a waste separation scheme, they will follow me. It's like, it's just little things like that.
Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time. We've got about 2 minutes left. In the remaining time, once again, in your broad experience, speaking with a huge cross section of Malaysian society, what do you think you would like to leave our listeners with as a take-home message?
I think definitely for one, everybody's action counts, but we need to take action. I think we're kind of stuck at awareness now. We have to go beyond awareness. And even, let's say, talking about COP, I think so much of COP is so high level and so vague. We talk about financing and whatnot. But I think for next year, for example, the updated NDC is definitely something we have to pay attention to. And we need to know, for even Malaysia, our NDC and our net zero targets, how are we going to get there? Because we have no idea. And I think that's something everybody needs to partake in as well. And maybe not, I mean, we are all consumers, so we all play a part. The reason why electricity is might no longer be subsidized for quite fair number of us, or even RON 95, the petrol, there is a reason for that, and I think something for us to grapple with, for the longer term.
Thank you so much, Nat. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been speaking with Nat Tan Shayun, editor at The Edge, specializing in ESG and Malaysia, Southeast Asian region. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, do stay for the rest of the day. We are only beginning this last day of coverage in parallel with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. So do stay with us. Have a pleasant day. Back to you, Avicenna.
Thank you, Dr. Gary and Ms. Nat, for yet another insightful discussion. As a quick reminder, each day of our event has begun with a 30-minute breakfast chat hosted by Dr. Gary and his guest speakers, where they delve into his daily observations and reflections. These sessions will be recorded on our CGM channel and periodically streamed by the Malaysia Pavilion during session transitions. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Jenifer Thien, Council Member of CGM, to the stage to deliver today's welcoming remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a really great honor to be here with you today and to welcome all of you to Day 9 of the Malaysia COP29 panelists program. So my name is Jenifer Thien, and I'm a council member with Climate Governance Malaysia. Today's theme is Malaysia Diverse Voices, all for sustainability. Now this theme, it really invites all of us to reflect on the very critical point that sustainability is not a solo effort, but is actually the collective sum of all of our contributions from every corner of society. I think all of you will agree with me that Malaysia is very unique in that we have a very rich diversity, and that rich diversity is not only a hallmark of our country's identity, but is also a source of very unique perspective and very unique practices that are invaluable for our sustainability journey. And we really, really need to fully leverage that unique diversity. And also the civil society in Malaysia, represented by very passionate NGOs and grassroots organizations. Now, these are particularly vital. These organizations, they have the unique opportunity to amplify the voices of very ordinary citizens, to amplify the critical issues, and more importantly, they drive change from the ground up. They educate, they inspire, and they mobilize Malaysians to protect our environment, our social fabric, and they also advocate for really forward-thinking policies. Now, these groups, they are indeed the heartbeat of our environmental movement, and certainly all of you will be hearing more from some of them today. I also think it's worthwhile to mention that the private sector is also beginning to respond, and they understand and recognize the enormous environmental costs and impact if we continue with business as usual. So today we are already seeing some very encouraging shifts with companies committing to sustainability, not just as an obligation, right? But they really see the opportunity to innovate and to lead. So for today, we have a very robust program. And I want to thank all of our speakers in advance for their time and also their perspective on a number of topics which will certainly help us to appreciate that diversity is our strength, and that when we have shared responsibility will deliver greater impact and a greater outcome. I really encourage all of us to engage fully today and to reflect how each of us can contribute to this collective journey. So before we start, a few housekeeping. Firstly, this session will be recorded and it will be made available on CGM's official YouTube channel. So if you miss any part of it, you can always go back to our YouTube channel and pick that up. Secondly, you are also welcome to follow our LinkedIn page for the latest climate updates. So go to LinkedIn, and we have our page is Climate Governance Malaysia, and you have all of the latest news, latest climate updates there. And thirdly, we also encourage you to stay connected with us on our CGM newsletter, and you can subscribe through our official website, which is www.cgmalaysia.com. So on that note, I want to thank you again for making time, and I hope all of us will really have an impactful day today, an inspiring day ahead. So thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Ms. Jenifer. Let's now begin our first session of the day with messages from RIMAU, an NGO dedicated to the preservation of the Malayan tiger, and Mr. Peter Ong, photographer and author of Wang, Kelian, Perlis, The Forgotten Valley, and Primus, the Primates of Peninsular Malaysia. Let's hear what they have to say.
Dalam hutan yang saya cintai, saya berdiri sebagai penjaga alam orang asli. Setiap bunyi hutan, setiap jejak kaki di tanah ini adalah seperti detak jantung saya sendiri. Harimau, raja hutan adalah saudaraku. Tetapi ada mereka yang datang dengan niat jahat, mencuri kehidupan liar untuk keuntungan diri sendiri. Mereka penjajah hutan, pemusnah segala yang berharga. Hutan ini adalah rumah kita. Dengan semangat warisan nenek moyang, saya bersumpah untuk melindungi hutan ini. Tiap langkah yang saya ambil adalah untuk mempertahankan kehidupan liar. Saya adalah suara mereka yang bisu. Bukan hanya hutan ini yang saya pertahankan, tetapi juga warisan anak cucu kita. Saya akan terus berjuang menghadapi bahaya demi cinta pada hutan ini, makhluk-makhluknya yang mempersona. Kita adalah satu dengan hutan ini dan saya adalah penjaganya.
Hi there, my name is Peter Ong and I'm a wildlife photographer. I've been working to take photos and video images of Malaysia's 26 primate species for the past couple of years, and I've also just recently published a book on the 12 primate species that can be found in Peninsular Malaysia. Malaysia is one of the 17 most biodiverse nations on the face of this planet, but sadly, a lot of our biodiversity still remains unknown, sometimes even unstudied. A lot of the times, we also struggle to get high-resolution images and footage. So I believe that's how I can contribute, coming from a creative background. Just by snapping good quality images, it helps researchers and other NGOs not only study these elusive animals, but also to help in their outreach programs. There is a saying in Bahasa Malaysia, tak kenal maka tak cinta, and an image can speak 1,000 words. So there's always room for creativity, even in conservation and the wildlife arena. My hope for Malaysia is that we continue to encourage more of our younger generation to study what we have. We have to take responsibility to find out our own answers to our own issues. And I think the hope lies with the younger generation. A lot of my work also involves encouraging local communities, especially younger members of the local communities who live in or work around the forested areas. They hold the keys to our better understanding of our own natural world. And by reaching out with them, by building better bridges, who knows, a lot more issues can possibly be resolved. So I would say, let's get together, roll up our sleeves, and let's build bridges. In today's world, an extra bridge or two won't hurt and just might make all the difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the inspiring messages. We shall now continue with our first panel of the day, titled Citizen Voices Behind Sustainability. This session features a distinguished panel of speakers, including Mr. Patrick Lee, Content Director and Key Opinion Leader at Critical 2, Mr. Kennedy Michael, Founder of the Alliance of River Tree, Ms. Alicia Teoh, Founder and Secretary at the Shah Alam Community Forest, or SACF Society, and Ms. Florence, Communications Director at Bridge of Asia, who will be our moderator for this session. Please join me in warmly welcoming our esteemed panelists as they lead us through this discussion. Over to you.
Hi, and welcome to Climate Governance Malaysia's COP29 parallel event. This is a panel discussion titled Citizen Voices Behind Sustainability, and I'm Florence Looi, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Now, if you've ever wondered about whether individual efforts can make a difference in slowing down the climate crisis or putting in place long-term sustainable solutions, you've come to the right place. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to be exploring the power of community-led movements and initiatives to drive sustainable change in Malaysia. Let me introduce you to our panelists. I know Ariffin has done a brief introduction. I'll share a little bit more about them, and they'll be able to share their first-hand experience with you. Now, we have Mr. Patrick Lee, Content Director of Critical 2. That's an environmental climate video network that uses visual storytelling to create climate and environment-focused content. We also have Mr. Kennedy Michael. He's the founder and director of Alliance of River 3, an environmental conservation group founded in 2018 to rehabilitate and preserve the Klang River. And finally, Ms. Alicia Teoh, founder and secretary of the Shah Alam Community Forest Society, a group dedicated to the conservation of the Shah Alam Community Forest. Patrick, Michael, and Alicia, welcome to the panel. Now, first of all, could I please get each of you to give a quick self-introduction, telling us a little bit more about your background, detail about what you do now, and what inspired you to set up your organization. Let's start with you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Florence, and hello, everybody. Hello to everyone in KL and also to those of you in Baku right now. My name is Patrick Lee, and as Florence has rightly said, I am the content director of the environmental network, and which also deals with climate critical 2. Where we aim to bridge the gap between ignorance and climate understanding. So basically what we do here at Critical 2 is we discover ideas, issues, and people's voices. And what we do is we craft them into visual stories using video techniques. And after that, we put them out into the open, particularly right now on social media. So our focus right now is on local, even hyper-local stories that have a climate or environmental angle to them. And the aim is to show our audience and communities of what's going on in these climate, environment, and sustainability spheres. So what inspired us to create this was knowing that in this setting where climate change really big issue, it's also unavoidable, and it seems that the world seems very bleak, there's a lot of doom involved. There actually are stories out there that aren't being written or even being talked about. And from what we've seen is basically there is an amazing hunger for stories like these that, you know, right now we have a world that is so bogged down by misinformation, disinformation, and all other factors. And so we felt that the time was right now to come in and tell stories that not only inform you, but also inspire to do greater action.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. Now, Kennedy, what about you?
Hi, good morning, everyone here and everywhere. We're the beneficiaries of Critical 2. That's why we exist, so that we can provide stories for them. I'm the founder of the Alliance of River Tree, together with my co-founders, Shwento and Selina Hussein. We started the Alliance of River Tree as a community-based organization that works on river conservation, protection, and rehabilitation. We start at the start of the Klang River, which is upstream near the Klang Gates Dam. And our aim is to transform and restore the river ecosystem here for the first 5 kilometers of the Klang River, because water is critical to everything that we do. Without water, we wouldn't be having computers, we wouldn't be having smartphones, we wouldn't be having data centers. And in Malaysia, upwards of 97% of our raw water, potable water, is sourced directly from rivers, which makes it very affordable. But with the advent of climate change and development, all our water sources are being threatened. So we feel that because we live here and we have access to clean water, we should at the very least try to protect this source of water, and also to educate everyone that we are all polluters and therefore we all have a responsibility to restoring and protecting the river ecosystem. Why we started this, it was accidental. Some friends of ours were part of the River of Life public outreach program, and they had said to me that since I've been living here for 46 years, I should at least take an interest in what's happening in my own backyard. Prior to this, most of my work is in marine conservation. So I went, I looked at it, and I said, what are you guys doing? They said, we're doing rope up. And I said, doesn't seem to be working. And they said, if you're so clever, you go figure it out. And so I said, okay, I'll show you how it's done. And 6 years down the road, 330 weeks of weekly, continuous, unbroken gotong royong. Here we are. We've managed to restore at least 1 kilometer of the river, where we ensure that it's class 1. And we have another 4 more kilometers to go and 6 years in which to do it. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. That sounds like a real accomplishment. We'll pick your minds, pick your brains more on that. Next, can we have Alicia? Can you introduce yourself, telling us how you started the SACF? Yes.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me this platform to share about Shalom Community Forest. So basically, I started about 10 years ago, and I was just a resident at the time. I'm still just a resident, actually, and came to know about patch of forest. And so out of curiosity, I decided to gather some residents and we go checked it out. That was the first time I stepped into the what is known as Shalom Community Forest today. And well, we decided to build some trails, you know, just to because a lot of us who went for the recce, we were hikers and some were mountain bikers. So so we did that, but then now I started to ask myself, no, we are investing so much time and effort into this place. Is it even protected? No, I mean, and I had completely no idea, no clue about forest conservation at all. But then I started talking to several people. I talked to Justine from Kota Damansara Community Forest. I talked to people from MNS, to even from WWF Malaysia, and all of them encouraged me to look into this, to explore and see how and what I can do, and to protect this gem in my background. So in 2016, I decided to set up this society. And here we are, 9 years later, you know, doing the work. And honestly, while our focus is on the Shalom Community Forest, we are also very active in advocating the protection of urban forests in general in Malaysia. You know, not just urban forests, but urban forest that is managed and accessed by the communities around it. Because as we know, right now more and more people more and more of the world population are moving into urban centers. So what that means is there's going to be a very strong pressure, there's immense pressure on the natural ecosystems left within the city and urban areas. So more and more we need to look into this area, because we used to think traditionally conservation is always done, it's always at the fringes of the cities or in rural area. But now, because of how fast urban centers are growing, we really need to look into preserving whatever that we can, rewilding, restoring, because there's a lot of effect on the human well-being as well. Yeah, so this is also what we are doing right now.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is to Patrick. You know, the Alliance of River 3 and the Shah Alam Community Forest Society are great examples of community initiatives. What impact do initiatives like these have on society as a whole?
Okay, thanks, Florence. So Alliance of River Tree and SACF Society, they're two of many, many groups in this country that really what they do is they care for the climate and the environment. And they have a number of things in common. And basically at the fundamental level, they're pretty much fearless. They're action-oriented. They are not afraid to get their hands dirty, and they're very happy to be working on grassroots level. That is with ordinary folks like you and me. And what we've seen is that because of the people inside these groups, because of their efforts and their passions, and working pretty much non-stops for the causes they believe in. I think what this has caused, what this has sort of resulted in, is that people can see this, and people have seen it, and this has led to this understanding that if you're genuine about something, if you really believe in something, people around you notice that, and they will want to have a piece of what you're having. They would also look at it and say, hey, I want what that person has got, right? So in the case of SACF Society, it can be seen as like one of the things that they did was, I mean, aside from the surveys that they did, collecting all the information that they had, and sending it over to government, and then raising it in courts and all that sort of thing. One of the major things that they did was they gathered in like groups of a few hundred to form sort of a human chain protest through their forest to save it. And also these regular surveys that they've been doing every now and then to sort of make sure that the forest, that to sort of highlight the importance of the forest that they're trying to protect. In the case of Alliance of River Tree, so for the past 6 years, and this is really quite inspiring, actually. I mean, how many people would actually go through the whole effort of every weekend going down to the river and cleaning it, removing weeds, planting trees. Not a lot of people have that kind of patience. And basically so they have done it, and they have also gotten thousands of volunteers who have basically said, I'm going to spend my weekend just doing the things that we're doing, and getting involved and making sure that they're not only restoring it, but getting it back on track, so that one day people can come back to the river and say, hey, I want to hang out here again. So long story short, I believe the strongest impact comes in the form of community involvement. And I think once you have that, all the other things like taking it to courts, taking it to the government, advocacy, seminars, and all that sort of thing, all of that, falls into place. But I think the biggest thing is, getting it to the grassroots and getting your hands dirty, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's talk about the nitty-gritty of setting up these community initiatives. Kennedy and Alicia, what were the challenges you faced in setting up your organizations? Let's start with you, Kennedy.
So it wasn't really a challenge setting up the organization. The previous organizations that were working in the river care space, many of them are registered NGOs. And from my observation of running NGOs myself, I've noticed that most people only care about position and power. And then there's all this requirement by ROS for due diligence and governance and administration, and that takes up a lot of time. Whereas we just wanted to do what we wanted to do. So looking at the way things were, and knowing the law to some extent, we decided that we would start with a group of 4 people at the time. The requirement is that if you are 5 or more, you have to register. So 4 just falls under, and we call ourselves friends of Sungai Klang, Taman Melawati, because we were friends with each other, and also we were friends of the river, and we welcome people who were interested in being friends with the river, which means that, you know, if you have a friend, you wouldn't mistreat your friend, you'd care for your friend. And the governance structure is quite simple. It's a benevolent dictatorship. I am a dictator. I have decided to take this up. This is my vision. This is my plan. This is my investment. Even if no one else comes to help me, I will do this alone, and I will either succeed or fail. But the action is what is really necessary. And we have a science-based program. We collaborate with a lot of people who inform our work so that we don't do the wrong things. And so the real challenge, I think, is just showing up every week. There's no organization to run per se. And we don't have all the governance issues. We don't receive funding partly because of that. And the idea also is not to receive funding, or at least direct funding, because 1, we don't want to be beholden to anyone. 2, regardless the state of the economy, everybody needs water every day. Every business needs water every day. All of the planet, the living planet, needs water every day. So you cannot ransom it or tie it to economics. It cannot be commodified. It cannot be traded. It is a human right, not just for us, but it's also an environmental right. And so that's the basis. So in terms of challenge, there isn't any really. Setting up the organization. In fact, we have a lot of freedom to do what we do because we're not bogged down by administrative stuff. We're very, very clear about how we do these things, and we're principles-based. So whenever we encounter new situations, we spend our time trying to figure out how do we translate the principle into action, as opposed to trying to follow rigid laws and rules and stuff like that. So yeah, we didn't have that challenge of setting up an organization.
Okay, and what about you, Alicia? What was it like setting up the Shah Alam Community Forest Society?
So when I first mooted the idea to some of my friends and residents, a lot of them were very reluctant, you know. So I would say that one of the biggest challenge, and it remains a challenge today, is to get a consistent group of volunteers to form the committee required by the Registrar Society. So there's a lot of guidelines, a lot of rules, like what Kennedy mentioned. You know, we have to have an AGM every year. We have to get our accounts audited, you know, and we do an election. So there's a lot of all these how I say unnecessary administration, you know, that really just gets in the way. But we understand it has to happen because I understand there is a need for it because we need to be accountable. You know, we need to run the society in a fair and equitable way. So that's one. And then of course there's the issue of having no idea on how to start saving a forest, you know. So I didn't mention just now, but the Shah Alam Community Forest at that time was, and even today, it's not protected, you know, and we found out that it is actually has been gazetted to be developmental land for housing and mixed development as well as a cemetery. So until today, we're still fighting that. So along the way, we had to learn about the land laws, you know, the regulatory bodies, the agencies, the authorities, the various authorities that are involved in this process. And unfortunately, there's no template on how to save a forest, you know, because every forest is unique, every forest has its unique circumstances and different set of stakeholders. So we really had to just learn as we go. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we face and are still facing today.
Okay, well, now both your organizations have gone on for very many years, 6 years, 9 years, right? What are some of the strategies then that you have to ensure that you achieve your goals. Now, Kennedy, I'm going to start with you again. You talked about not intentionally not getting funding so that you're not beholden to anyone. But do you need money to run your organization? Do you how are you on a completely voluntary basis? And how do you sustain that? How do you, you can show up weekend after weekend. How do you make sure everyone else does?
Okay, so start backwards. We don't need to make sure that everyone does. People are free to show up or not to show up. That's on them. So we don't worry about that kind of thing. Like I said, we're willing to go it alone if necessary, and occasionally we're down to bare bones. But we have a happy problem now that we have to turn people away. Part of it is directly because of the work done by Patrick and Critical too. We get more inquiries for people to volunteer, both individuals and corporations as well. But after our first year, we didn't have that problem anymore. The first year, the first 52 weeks was a learning for us, and every day is a learning for us. We became popular. We started winning awards, and human nature. So I created this program called the River CPR program, and it's based on the ego, because that's how we exist. That's how human beings exist in the world. Everything from our ability to appreciate beauty, our sense of loss, shame, guilt, desire, everything that drives us in the psychosocial space is the ego. It's not good or it's not bad. So we built this program predicated on there are trigger points and levers and buttons that we can push and pull to elicit participation and behavior. And one of them is everybody wants to back a winner. It's like Manchester United, right? Their fans only stay with them when they win, unlike Liverpool fans. So we started winning awards, and the awards were calculated, right? The profile was calculated to attract interest in what we do. And then we made a way for people to participate easily. So our program is not strenuous, it's not difficult, it's not physically taxing. We do get quite a bit of requests to make it longer and to make it more challenging. And from our experience, 2 hours on a Saturday, you start at 9:30. We used to start earlier, we used to start 8:30. You finish by 11:30, and you still have the rest of the day. And the actual work is only an hour, and it's not necessarily strenuous. Usually the sun is a lot more forgiving at that time of the day. And then the second hour is given to education, because just us alone, it's not enough. And I'm sure Alicia will attest to that. We need 100,000 people like us up and down the country in various fields doing that. And the way to do that is to educate them. So we have this thing called Gotong Royong Education by Action, or Graduate Action as we call it. And it's to learn by doing. And also, as how Alicia mentioned, right, we don't know a lot of things, but because we're friends, and one thing you do with your friends is you get to know them. And your friends also would like you to know them. So the more time you spend and the more quality time and attention you give to your friend, the more you know about your friend, and the more your friend informs you of what it needs or what they want. So in this case, all our education has come from the river itself by spending time. So that's the other advantage of doing it the way we do it. Now, in terms of money, yes, we do need money, but the money is being used for what? It's being used to develop the work that we do here. And so people can buy us stuff that we need. So we always have what we call a menu of things that you can pay for, things that you can buy and give to us, like machines and tools and this and that. There's some infrastructure that we're building so people can pay directly to that. So the accountability is that no money comes through our hands, right? So you pay the shopkeeper to supply a grass cutting machine. That's between you and the shopkeeper. There's total transparency. We have the machines, we use it, we report weekly on our social media. So it's very open, very transparent, very accountable. But we also trade knowledge. So we do a lot of ESG training for corporations and for groups and for schools, and they pay us to conduct these training programs. And that's how we sustain what we do. A lot of the money goes back into what we do. In fact, at any given time, there's usually about 40 or 60,000 ringgit of our money invested in the work that we do. So that's how we sustain the work that we do. This is kind of true circular economy because it allows for direct participation. We measure impacts. Those impacts are used by our partners. Some of our partners have won awards. Recently, our key collaborator, SMK Taman Melawati, they won 9 awards at the World SDG Challenge for schools, and that's directly, their submission was for 2 of the programs that we do with them, that we've been doing with them for the last 3 years. So there's a tremendous amount of value that people get out of participating. It's not just brute force or just labor, manual labor, but there's value. It gives meaning to people's lives.
Okay, thank you, Kennedy. Now, Alicia, what about you? I know you mentioned that you said there were initial, having to deal with administrative. That's part of one of the difficulties or the challenges that you still have getting people to show up. So what are some of the strategies that you use then to deal with these challenges?
Well, when we first started, we didn't really have much of a strategy. All we knew was we needed to form an entity because we needed the government to take us seriously. We needed stakeholders to take us seriously. So when we formed it, we started off with just 2 main goals, which is to lobby the government, 2 objectives, right? To lobby the government for the protection of this forest and also to raise awareness. And actually we've stuck to those 2 objectives over the years. But what I'd like to encourage or share with those who are watching is what worked for us and what helped us grow our influence is, first of all, consistent messaging. So know what you want to say, know what exactly you want to say, and say it as often as possible. So we had a lot of, we arranged a lot of media campaigns. We never turned down an interview with the media. We sent out press releases, we use social media, we try to say the same things over and over and over again. And then we, other than that, we tried everything, we tried lobbying the government through letters, meetings, consultations. We raised awareness through various platforms, community events, talks, and citizen science programs. We also engaged residents, and apart from that, what Patrick mentioned just now, we also went down the science route. We organized, we arranged and conducted biodiversity surveys to raise the ecological profile of the forest. Because a lot of people, when they see a forest, especially one that is small as our forest, being a remnant, okay, of the bigger forest over time, because of urbanization, what you're left is just small patches of forest. But even these forests are very important. So we have to raise awareness about the value of this forest, regardless of its size, So we've done quite a number of scientific studies, and we also incorporate the citizen science component into it. So we try everything. I've lost count on how many programs we've launched and how many meetings and talks I've attended. And then lastly is to manage expectations. Actually it's quite a hard thing to manage expectations, not just mine, but also my committee members and the public at large, and the community that have invested into this project, because we understand that we are fighting an uphill battle. We're fighting the powers that be to protect this forest. So manage expectations and understand that you may not have won the war, but you may have won small little battles along the way. So that is what keep us going over the years.
But Alicia, how, you want to preserve the forest, but how do we strike a balance between urban development and preserving green lungs?
Okay, so
government, what do you tell them if people are not convinced, because there is a battle, and we've seen that in Bukit Kiara. We're seeing it in so many places.
So firstly, I'd like to clarify, and this is what we always say to especially government officials, right? We're not against development. We're completely not against it. But we believe that development has to be responsible and it has to be sustainable. And from my experience, I see that there is a lack of understanding about the value of natural ecosystems for human well-being. And this lack of understanding, unfortunately, is so prevalent in government. I don't know, I just get that sense. I may be wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are individuals in the government who understands this, but most people we talk to, first of all, they ask about the size of the forest. And when they find out, oh, it's only that size, it's only that big or that small, and then they dismiss it, because like I say, traditional conservation involves a huge swath of forest. So that is one thing, and when we think about conservation, we always think about, when we think about forest conservation specifically, we always think about the charismatic species, the tigers, the elephants, special plant species and all that. But when we look at ecosystem services right now, there's an emerging approach to conservation called the ecosystem services approach, where we look into services, not only ecological services, but other services. So this is very important because when we talk about urban community forest, we are talking about a forest that's accessed by people, by the community. So not only have ecological value of that forest, which involves biodiversity protection, it also involves hydrology, regulation, it involves flood mitigation, urban heat island mitigation, and even a carbon sink. We don't only have these services, we also have health and recreational services of this forest, of value of this forest. So we also have educational value. We also have social and cultural value. So a forest that is sitting in an urban area has so much more to offer than a forest that is way on the other side of the country. Malaysia has this commitment of 50% forest cover or tree cover, I don't know. They claim we have it, but most of it are in the outskirts, most of it are in East Malaysia. How is that going to benefit the people? How is, when we commit to such a commitment, there is a reason why you need 50% forest cover, because it's not just, for habitat, but for all these other services that a forest provides. So we need to ensure that this 50% coverage is not being parked all in one area, but it should be in every municipality, every district of Malaysia, regardless of rural, urban, So the onus actually is on the local government or the city council, to make sure that this happens when they plan the local plan. They need to understand the importance of having a natural forest, in their plan, because if not, then the people around will suffer, from flood, from heat, from lack of exposure or experiential learning of natural ecosystems. One thing I really, what struck me the most about this forest is that children, even small children, kindergarten children, can access it because it's safe. It's safe, it's close by. They can get to experience the forest. And just now, in the video we saw from Peter Ong, tak kenal maka tak cinta. We have a responsibility to make sure that this young generation know the forest, and the best way is to bring them in it, let them experience it, so that in the future they can make better decisions when it comes to protection of ecosystems. Sorry, Florence, you're muted.
Okay, so what are the long-term goals for your organizations? I'm going to start with Kennedy. What's the vision for the Alliance of River 3, and what are you going to do to ensure that you have an impact beyond the current projects, even after you leave Alliance of River 3?
So there's an assumption that we're going to leave the Alliance of River Tree.
Well, I mean, if you ever retire one day, you know, you want the organization to still be there, or maybe it won't need to be because by then the river's clean.
Yes. Okay. So we started with a 12-year plan when we started on the 28th of July, 2018. We said it's going to take us 12 years to achieve what we set out to do, and we're platformed on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we aligned that to the Agenda 2030. I don't know what the plan is after the SDG expires, but I think it's one of the most comprehensive set of tools given to us by people who really care, experts from around the world, to save ourselves. Actually, we're not saving the planet, you know. And so we have a 12-year plan. There are clear strategies, there are checkpoints that we're doing. But I come from the school of thought of being very clear about what you want to do and then not worrying about how it happens. Because the river never worries about how it flows, it just flows. And if there's an obstacle, it'll find a way around it, you know. And so we mirror the river in a lot of ways. So the exit point actually is the 24th of September 2030. And whether we finish, whether we succeed or not is immaterial. I would have given 12 years of my life. We've seen kids who started in standard 1 next to the school to us, and now they're in Form 1. And that's half a generation, you know. And so this is also an example for people to say what's important to you, right? And how much of your life will you give in service to what's important to you? And Alicia mentioned earlier about ecosystem services and stuff. And the fact is, the planet really doesn't need us. You know, if you look at evolution and evolutionary biology, nature is full of examples of experiments that failed. And what happens in that situation is that the species that don't work get eradicated. And I believe that we as human beings are the last great big experiment by nature to see how useful or how useless we are. And if we fail as an evolution, then nature will wipe us out. And within us are the seeds of our own destruction. And I'll bet money on it. Look at all the disasters that are happening on a daily basis around the world. It's simple things like people driving their cars and killing other people. We don't even talk about the environmental issues, right? Just day-to-day stuff, right? And that's what human beings do, right? The only species that does that, mindless for no reason, you know. So we think that we're critical to the ecosystem. We're not. We're not, you know. And I always say, one way to do that is condoms. Like, why do we need to propagate? Really, why? We're that critical juncture in human history where there's no more middle of the road. You're either helpful or you're harmful, and it goes to the level of ingratitude and ignorance that you carry. But in this day and age, there's no more reason to be ignorant, right? And so we as human beings don't choose, and then we make up all kinds of excuses. Alicia, you were saying that we were not against development. I am. This you call this development? This is not development. This is destruction. Take away the forest, take away the water. There's no human beings. So the economic system itself is wrong because it won't take what we call the ecosystem services as an input factor. Imagine that if you have to pay for your oxygen, and you have to pay for the trees that generate the oxygen, and if you have to pay for the microbes and the mycelium that keeps the forest going, because you can't manufacture oxygen, or you can, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. You can't manufacture water, or you can, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. And what's the price? You couldn't buy anything because the price of that ecosystem services is not affordable. And here we are taking it for free, stealing it without regard, you know, and we call that economics. We call that development. That's mental illness. It's not, you know, and that's why you need to go into the forest to reset your mind, right, Alicia? And then to reorient it and understand that we are insignificant. Why? But people come and ask us, how do you clean the river? I said, 7 days, kill everybody. It's fact. Eradicate all humans and the river will right itself within 7 days. This is scientific fact, because the only species that pollutes and damages the river are human beings. Animals don't do that. So if we go by the economic system now, the capitalist system now, it's fact, right? You take the most efficient route to get the maximum output. So if the objective is to restore the planet, then get rid of the people that are damaging the planet. So this is a way of framing the situation and knowing our own place. So there's a tremendous amount of arrogance that humans are important. We're not. I mean, really, you ask yourself, if you were to disappear from the earth tomorrow, what difference? What's the loss to the planet? Nothing. It's a gain, because there's more nutrition. If you haven't been eating junk food all your life, there's more nutrition for the soil. There's less taxation on the ecosystem services, like as if the environment owes us something. So it's a plus. Multiply that by 8 billion, that's 8 billion pluses. The planet has reached this place without Homo sapiens, without hominids, for hundreds of millions of years. And the arrogance of us to think that we matter. Come on, seriously.
Okay, thank you, Kennedy. Very radical perspective there. But a lot of what you said is true, really. You kind of remind me of the character Samuel Jackson's character, Samuel, what's his name? The character in Kingsman.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of people who think like that. But hey, again, that's what we're doing in the capitalist system. And we couch it in terms of economics. We produce stuff that kills people. Just bombs. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are great inspirations. Somebody figured out how to kill human beings in the blink of an eye, 100,000 people at a time. And then all the pollution that we put out there is killing people slowly. So how is it different from my way? It's just more efficient.
Okay, I'm going to move on the discussion to the media. Can the media really frame perspectives on climate change and on sustainability? Patrick Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen, so if there's one thing, okay, if there's one thing that's separate, and of course there are many things that separate us from, the animals, other than the fact that we kill each other to incredible amounts, as Kennedy mentioned, is that we're actually capable of telling stories, and stories are basically what have led the human race to basically we gathered around campfires for thousands of years and kept ourselves inspired and kept ourselves warm, and basically not killing each other at the campfire by telling each other stories. And that has sort of allowed us to progress as much as we have. So I think that media, yes, definitely can help in this regard, whether it's traditional, non-traditional, whether you're newspapers, social media, somebody on TikTok. Anyone who's capable of telling a story can raise awareness, can raise the voice, shape perspectives, all that sort of thing. But I think the great challenge or the great question is, how do we do that? And to me, I can't speak for everybody, but to me, I think the best way to do this is by discovering voices and then making a story out of that voice.
And that's kind of what you're doing at Critical too.
Yeah. So I discovered the voices. So in these two examples, in Alliance of Rivetry, in SACF Society, so what I did was the issue was, one was forest conservation, the other one was about river rehabilitation and preservation. So, and of course, what I did was looked at the people behind those efforts, and you know what, I put a human face on them and see where that goes, and so far it's been going pretty well.
Okay. Now, how has technology, including the use of social media, influenced the way citizen action is carried out in Malaysia? And do you think we're using technology to its full potential?
Okay, so one of the things that so I'm going to preface this by saying, way back in the day, I mean, I wouldn't say way back, this is probably like 15-20 years ago. Gosh, that makes me old. So well, what people I remember there was this one time there was this seminar that I went for, and not quite like this one, but it's something similar. But it was about politics, and there people are giving all their views, but then at the end, towards the end, there was a Q&A, and then somebody actually came up and said, you guys, admonishing all of us and telling us, that we were being very bad and naughty and saying things like, you should not be saying these sorts of things, you should only raise it in the official channels, right? And that was the kind of scenario that we were in. We only had TV, radio, newspapers, and they were all very tightly controlled. And on top of that, people were always self-censoring. But thanks to the internet, those days are mostly gone. Now people are very bold to make their voices heard, and so it went on from newspapers to websites, blogs, social media, podcasts, online seminars, and these. These avenues have definitely helped to get the word out about citizen action. Is definitely helped to get the word out about all sorts of things. I will say that the number of internet know-it-alls, the number of people who know everything on social media, and just random general trolls just coming out and telling me that, yes, I know more than what Kennedy or Alicia is doing, but I'm just a random face. That one has definitely increased as well. But the thing is, I'm not going to say that we don't need those people. We don't need that. I will say that those kinds of things are actually good for the conversation, because it shows that society is actually making sort of an effort into raising awareness. I would say that this shows that all the avenues are really being used to raise awareness about things like climate change and environment. The only thing is that right now I seem to see quite a bit of an imbalance. So like you go on any media right now, since traditional media is sort of on the decline, so social media has definitely overtaken that. And what has that sort of created is that there's an imbalance, and it's so where you're supposed to have this chatter about things about the climate, about the environment, but you're drowned out by things like memes and food and stuff on TikTok and Instagram, which is, to me, it's basically bordering on pornography. But I think there is definitely more room for more discussions from ordinary people who aren't necessarily leaders, but I think who can definitely fill in the space on climate, environment, and sustainability. Yeah.
I'm just sorry, can I just add something about that, about media, right? And I'd like to say that that the media has a responsibility to shape perspectives. And to be fair, in Malaysia, the media has been pretty supportive. Every time we mention about environmental issues, they are usually quite willing to cover our stories. Unfortunately, right now there seems to be a lot of options when it comes to getting your news. And what happens is increasingly we are consuming media in our own little silos and our own little echo chambers. And there's also this thing about climate change fatigue. There's so many outlets talking about climate change from different angles, and people are just getting really tired about it. So that's why it's also great that people like Patrick is finding creative ways to talk about these issues. But I think right now, since we are talking about grassroots actions, right, I think it's really up to individuals right now to share and to push this message to their immediate circle, to influence from their friends, their families, and hopefully over time, people will get a coherent, homogeneous messaging. Because, last time I always think with all these social media is really great and all, but the thing is, remember last time when back then, 10, 15 years ago, when all of us get our media through the same platform, And then we can discuss it with our friends later, you know, oh, do you watch that movie last night, you know, and we can go on a blow by blow on what happened and all that. But right now, because everybody's consuming different medias at different times and different topics, you know, it's really hard to have a single coherent and, you know, conversation about something, you know, everybody's talking and thinking differently. Yeah. So that's that's my opinion about it.
So do you find that in Malaysia that there's still a sense of deference to authorities and the perception that government knows best? And is that a major hindrance to grassroots movements? I'm going to open this question to all of you. Patrick, from your perspective, as someone who knows what the media is like, and to Kennedy and Alicia, from your perspective of running the organization, you know, has that been a hindrance, or maybe not a major problem, but kind of a problem to getting your movement going?
Okay, I wouldn't say it's a. Oh, no, Kennedy raised his hand. Yes. Okay. All right. I wouldn't say it's a hindrance. I wouldn't. If anything, more than anything, it's really, really annoying. Because right now I do all these videos, and I see all these comments on the videos that I do, on the stories that I make, and all that. Words like, do you have permission to do what you're doing? Like not directing it towards me, but directing it to people like Kennedy, to Alicia, and all these other people. Do you have permission? Aren't you doing what you're doing is illegal? Why are you making Malaysia look bad? You know, and saying things like, "Oh, the government will come and shut you down." You know, it's very silly. Because if they actually watch the video, I will actually have said yes, they actually have permission. You know. I actually said it many times, you know, but I guess people don't read sometimes. But from what I see, people like Andy, Alicia, and so many others have not stopped. Comments, so what? They still carry on. And I think it's just testament to their fearlessness in that sense, or maybe they just have incredible amounts of thick skin. But not everyone has, you know, this kind of strength and conviction. So, and if you're new to this sort of thing, so hearing people say like, oh, how you know, government knows best and you know nothing, that's going to dissuade you from carrying on. And I think to get around this, I feel what organizations, groups, activists, volunteers, so on and so forth, basically what I think what they can do is basically to band together, maybe not as a group, but like, you know, individuals, sort of like families, so to speak, to sort of back each other up and support each other, and sort of to create a camaraderie to back each other up and say, you know, if they get one of these annoying comments, or if, you know, some authorities come and repress them or something, that, you know, can really back them up. And I think efforts like that can really go a long way.
Like a citizen action support group.
Yeah, something like that, but like over drinks and stuff.
Okay, so to Kennedy and Alicia, like, did you encounter that, especially in the early days of your organization? And how did you deal with that? How did you deal with people who express those views?
So Alicia, if you don't mind, I'm going to start before I forget. So this one goes out to Puan Haslina Amir from Lembaga Urusai Selangor. She's in Baku right now representing Luas, because it's a testament of what I'm about to speak to. You don't need permission to pick up rubbish from a drain, from the riverbank, from the side of the road, from outside. You don't. There's no law that's going to be, oi, who asked you to pick up that rubbish? Oh, that's like the same as murder, and I'm going to charge you in court. Seriously. Right? So that starts with the level of ignorance among people. The second one is we have a strategy of true power comes from being able to work with your enemies, because they are going to keep you on your toes. They're going to keep you honest. They're going to push you to excel and to cover your back, which means only progress can come out of it. And so the days of government knows best has definitely gone out the window. And I mentioned Puan Haslina because Lembaga Urus Air Selangor is one of the few agencies in the country, whether at the state level or federal level, that has embraced this. So remember how I started by saying that when an unregistered entity, we're a community-based organization, and to their credit, the earlier Pengarah of Luas, when they wanted to work with the community, they said, hey, listen, these guys are already doing what we're trying to do, I have been trying to do and haven't succeeded. And they're just friends, they're just a bunch of friends. So why don't we support them, right? They don't want to be registered for a reason. So we as government, we can recognize them, right? And we can assist them in all kinds of ways. So we do, you do you and I'll do me, that thing. They do what they do best and we do what we do best, right? So we fight all the time. And fighting is not a bad thing. It's like taking a whetstone to a knife to sharpen it so they can function better. And so Luas has led the way in this. They formed the Jabatan Kuasa Pelaksana Pemeliharaan Sungai-Sungai Negeri Selangor. And under that, they host the Friends of Rivers Selangor auspices, of which there are about 40 groups. Some of them are NGOs, some of them are like us, and they enable us to do what we do. And because they do that, we can spend all our time fighting with local communities. I've been fighting with residents nearby the river who are quite ignorant, a lot of money, but very ignorant about what rehabilitation actually looks like. And so they oppose everything that we do simply because they think they own the land, which they don't. And so I've even been to the police station 2 days ago because somebody made a report against us and they ended up looking really stupid. The cop said, what's your problem? You donkey or stupid or what? You don't even know who's doing what, and then you want to claim this, that, and whatever, And so, to their credit, even the police are becoming more aware of how the environmental situation works, how community works, how law and order works. So we've reached that point in our evolution as a community where even government is admitting that they don't know best, right? And you can only fool some of the people some of the time for so long. And with the advent of technology and the internet, they can't prop the lie, and they realize that the only way forward is to work together. And we often forget that people in government are also citizens, so they play two roles. They too have the right to vote. They too have the right to choose. So educating, informing each other is really, really important. Building relationships is really, really important. Be willing to agree that fighting is not a bad thing. Opposing views is not a bad thing. It's how we gain clarity. And coming from that perspective, we can only move forward. And this is the same for business. But you got to be able to call it like it is, right? So this is my take on it, Alicia.
Okay, we're running out of time. So actually, I'd like to just, get all three of you to share with us some closing thoughts. So can I start with you, Alicia?
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. So closing thoughts is I assume I'm addressing to people who are aspiring to do something, right? To contribute to change in their country or rather just within their community. So my advice is just start. I mean, don't wait to be prepared. Don't wait to have all the knowledge. Just start. Find one or two friends. Talk about it. Dream about it, and and just start. And if possible, work within your local community where you are a direct stakeholder. Because one thing I've learned over the years is that the authorities prioritize direct residents, people who are directly impacted by whatever project it is, understandably, because they have to live with it, right, for the rest of their life. So direct stakeholders, you have very, very loud voices. So yeah, try as much as you can. If you want to make a change within the community that you live in. Of course, if there's nothing there, of course, please do support other communities and be adaptive, try everything, manage your expectations. It's gonna be a marathon, it's not a race, it's gonna be long. So just manage your expectations and it's worth it. All right, it is really worth it. Not just the impact that you'll see. You may not, like I say, you may not win the war, but you will see impacts that you've made along the way. Like if you ask me in the long term, do I do I see the forest being completely protected? No, to be honest, because it is really hard, and we are fighting against a lot of very difficult policies and situation. But have we achieved what we wanted to do? And I would say, yeah. I mean, we've raised our profile from 0 to 18,000 people on our Facebook group right now, and we have collected hundreds of thousands of petitions to protect the forest. I've conducted so many guided hikes with students, university students, with children, school children, kindergarten, young children. I think we are sowing seeds. We may not see the harvest now, but the seeds are there. So I'm okay. And honestly, that makes me sleep well at night.
Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah.
What about you, Kennedy?
So whatever I do doesn't help me sleep well at night. I'm insomniac, so not a yardstick. But here's a perspective. You know how I talked about backing a winner, and nature always wins, right? No matter what destruction we do, the earth has never lost. Nature has never lost. One day it will wipe us out, all of us. That's why some people are investing money in looking for life in other planets, right? So we've already won by the fact that we're in the game. So those who are not in the game have already won. Secondly, there's no guarantee you're going to live till tomorrow. So like Alicia says, start now. Do one single thing today. Just pick up one piece of rubbish that you didn't generate and put it in the bin. That's the power that you have, that you give yourself. The moment you give away your personal power, then you become a herd animal. And to reflect what Patrick said, the difference between humans and animals is that we are capable of individuation. And that's why nature put us on this planet, to evolve and see whether we can apprehend who we are in the cosmic context. So start now, whatever it is, start now. And it doesn't matter, because nature always wins, always. So you've already won. We just won't be around long enough to see what happens. But the fact that you're here today, you woke up and there was oxygen to breathe, there's water to drink, that's nature winning on a daily basis. So it's not all doom and gloom. You got to wear the hat, you got to get into the emotions, because that's where the game is played. That cosplay, it's fun, but the reality is nature cannot lose. So be on the winning side.
And Patrick, closing thoughts?
Okay, my closing thoughts is the climate crisis that we're facing, that we're seeing every single day, whether in very, very big, very small, or everyday sort of form. It's very big, and I think it's too much. It can seem like it's too much for one person or any one group to handle. And so there's a feeling, I think, that many people have when they look at hurricanes, tornadoes, heat waves, dying wildlife, floods, and they look at that and they say, you know what, there's nothing I can do about it. I think I'm just going to sit back with a beer and cigarette and say I'm just going to watch the world burn. But I like to I'd like to tell you to not to lose hope and not to give up. And even if it seems that you're just one person, but the reality is that there are 8 billion one persons on this planet right now, and you don't have to start with something big. You just do something. Just do something good, which is how most people here got started. They started out doing one small thing, and they paired up with another person who was also doing a small thing, and then it got to something really big. And now some of them are doing really, really amazing things. And I think if people just keep at it, that's gonna have a huge impact on the planet.
Okay, thank you very much. And to sum up, you've heard our panelists say there's a lot of climate fatigue, but it's not all doom and gloom. Small acts, when taken collectively, can bring about change. So I hope you leave this discussion energized, excited, and empowered. Thank you to our panelists, Patrick Lee from Critical 2, Kennedy Michael from Alliance of River 3, and Alicia Teoh from Shah Alam Community Forest Society. And thank you to Climate Governance Malaysia.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone.
Thank you all for the candid discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, please take a moment to scan the QR code for our survey. Your feedback will be very helpful for us to enhance your experience at future events. Now, it is my honor to introduce our next session, featuring messages from two remarkable individuals, Ms. Mariani Ramli, founder of the Gibbon Conservation Society, Malaysia, and Mr. Raidah Shah Idil, author of How to Free a Jinn. Let's take a moment to hear your inspiring words.
Hi everyone, I'm Mariani Ramli, or Bam, and I'm the founder and president of Gibbon Conservation Society. I am excited to share the work we do at Gibbon Conservation Society, or GCS, a non-profit dedicated to the rescue, rehabilitation and release of Malaysia's forgotten singing apes, gibbons, who are often victims of the illegal wildlife trade. These beautiful primates, known for their melodious calls that echo through the rainforest, are rapidly disappearing due to habitat loss and exploitation. GCS runs two rehabilitation projects, Malaya Gibbon Rehabilitation Project, or Malaya GRAP, in West Malaysia, established in 2013, and Borneo Gibbon Rehabilitation Project, or Borneo GRAP, in East Malaysia, established in 2022. We are Malaysia's first, and to this day, the only small ape rehabilitation centers providing a safe haven for orphan captive gibbons rescued from the illegal wildlife trade, bushmeat hunting, and other unfortunate situations. Our mission is to give these primates the proper care, nutrition, and rewilding guidance to reclaim their survival skills and return to the wild, where they can once again be part of the natural ecosystem. Rehabilitation is a long, challenging process, often take 5 to 15 years, depending on the individual gibbon's trauma and history. Our gibbons come from public surrenders or are rescued and confiscated by authorities. Many arrive deeply scarred, both physically and mentally, with severe stereotypic behaviors from years of abuse by humans. Each gibbon's path to recovery is unique, and we provide personalized care and psychological treatment to help them heal, grow, and prepare for life in the wild. A great example of our work is the story of Ebony, Collie, and their baby Axel. Their upcoming release marks a huge milestone not only for us, but also for wildlife rehabilitation in Malaysia, and it really highlights the importance of our work in safeguarding this endangered species. When Collie arrived at our rehabilitation center, his future seemed bleak. Malnourished and abused as a pet, Collie couldn't swing or climb like a wild gibbon and often fell trying. And Ebony's story was just as heartbreaking. Years of neglect left her confined in a tiny basket, scarred both mentally and physically. But then something incredible happened. Slowly, with proper rehabilitation, both Ebony and Collie began to heal. Collie's weak muscles grew stronger, and soon he was swinging effortlessly. For the first time in life, he could move freely. Ebony, though still carrying the emotional scars of her past, found comfort in Collie. Against all odds, these two form a bond, and that bond became a family. In 2023, their baby Axel was born, the first gibbon ever born in Malaysian Rehabilitation Center. Axel represents everything we work for, a new beginning, a future where gibbons no longer face the horrors of captivity and exploitation. Axel's birth marks a turning point, not just for this little family, but for the entire gibbon species in Malaysia. Axel's first breath was a breath of hope, proof that rehabilitation works and these incredible primates can have a second chance at life. Gibbon Conservation Society not only focuses on the protection and rehabilitation of Malaysia's gibbons, we also place a strong emphasis on engaging and empowering local communities. We strongly believe that real lasting change happens when communities feel connected to and responsible for the wildlife around them. Our eco-edutourism programs align closely with several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, contributing to a holistic approach to conservation that addresses social, environmental, and economic sustainability. SDG 4, Quality Education. Our educational programs and public outreach raise awareness on illegal wildlife trade and habitat protection, equipping communities and young people with essential knowledge to foster long-term conservation ethics. Additionally, we provide capacity building opportunities for local and indigenous communities and create skill roles for community members. SDG 5, Gender Equality. We are proud to have a predominantly female team leading our conservation and rehabilitation initiatives. In the conservation and scientific field, where women are often underrepresented, particularly in hands-on wildlife conservation roles, our team demonstrated that women play a crucial role in protecting biodiversity and shaping the future of environmental conservation. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Through our conservation-based employment and eco-edutourism program, we provide sustainable livelihood options that benefit communities while reducing reliance on activities harmful to wildlife and ecosystem. SDG 13, climate action. At both sites, we planted over 1,000 edible fruit trees to restore forest areas, providing sustainable food sources for both gibbons and humans. At our project sites, we serve only plant-based meals to reduce greenhouse gas emission associated with animal agriculture, while our zero plastic policy supports broader environmental goals that address climate change by encouraging sustainable practices at multiple levels. SDG 15, life on land. We are actively advocating for stricter wildlife protection policies. We support efforts to prevent poaching, illegal trade, and habitat destruction, directly contributing to the preservation and restoration of terrestrial ecosystem that gibbons and countless other species depends on. SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals. We collaborate with local and international organizations, government bodies as well, community leaders and members, including those from indigenous communities, to amplify the impact of our conservation work. Thank you for supporting us on this journey for the gibbons, for our communities, and for a healthier planet.
Hi everyone, my name is Raidah Shah Idil and I am the author of How to Free a Jinn, my debut middle-grade fantasy. It's about the adventures of 12-year-old Inshira, who was born in Malaysia but moved to Sydney with her mom under very mysterious circumstances. And when her grandma got sick, fell down and needed help, they moved back to KL at the age of Inshira being 12, and all these creepy supernatural things started happening. So my book, I wanted to convey this idea of coming back home to your ancestral homeland, despite being away in the West. In my case, in Sydney, I moved from Singapore to Sydney when I was 12, but it was a really, really challenging move in hindsight, you know. And even though I really did well in school to the point of burning out, and did well in university and worked hard, ticked off all the right boxes, I just got increasingly more sick and increasingly disconnected from myself and the vision I wanted for my life. And it wasn't until coming back to Malaysia as a married woman and having my children here, I realized how healing it is to be back in this beautiful country of my ancestry, of my birth. Just sitting or standing or walking through the jungles here has been so healing. There's something so magical and mystical, like right at my doorstep, you know, a few minutes drive down. And I love that about Malaysia, and I love how I'm safe here, I'm loved, I'm supported. I don't have to perform, I don't have to, you know, bend myself into awkward situations to please everybody else. I can just be me. And that's the journey I wanted Inshira, my 12-year-old character, to experience, but of course with the supernatural twist, because jungles are sacred. Jungles are beautiful and need to be protected. And in my book, I explore a bit deeper how it's not just the human life that is affected through deforestation and awful things like that. It's also the lives of the unseen beings whom we share this planet with, you know. So I hope you give my book a chance. It's a really fun read. Can get a bit scary, but again, it's a love letter to Malaysia, to my ancestral home, and I'm so grateful to be back, you know. And being able to thrive in this country has created the opportunity for me to even write this book. I have 3 young children, but with all the loving support in my amazing intergenerational household, my husband, my mom-in-law, you know, the help we get every single day has been so, so helpful. It's given me the creative license to breathe and dream freely, to write a character I wish I had growing up. So when I was a kid in Sydney, hiding in the library, there were like elves and unicorns, but there were no Malay Muslim girls, let alone in hijab. You know? So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, and I hope you enjoy my book. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Mariani and Ms. Raidah, for your insights. Next, we have a message from Datuk Dr. John Payne, CEO of Bringing Back Our Rare Animals, or BORA. Over to you, Dr. John.
Good morning, all. My name is John Payne. I'm British. I've lived in Malaysia for 49 years now. as a practicing biologist. And all that time really has been as a non-governmental organization, usually working with government, sometimes with corporations, usually with a small team of people, mainly Sabahans, because I've lived in Sabah, Malaysia, most of my life. So what I'm going to tell you is sort of clouded, and I make no apology, clouded by that background and those biases that I might have. So key things would be biology, conservation, biodiversity, management of wildlife. Now, I think I want to mention two themes, biodiversity and resilience. So biodiversity first. Now, I'd like you to imagine a sort of an imaginary graph, something like this, something like that. And along those lines is a curve. And this is an empirical graph. It's not based on particular data. It's just something that biologists have learned over the last 50 years. So along that axis there is habitat, and it could be forest, it could be a mix, but basically the key term is habitat. And here we have 0, and here we have 100. And that 100 might represent kilometers, square kilometers, or hectares, or more easily a percentage. So we have 0 to 100 along there. And up this axis, you have number of species from 0 there to 100 at the top. So that's the sort of picture I want to give you. Imagine that in your mind. Now, logically, if you have 100% of habitat, whatever time you choose, 2024 or 10,000 years ago, doesn't matter. But logically, you have 100% of species there in that 100% of habitat. And logically, also, that little corner, 0, you have 0 habitat, you'll have 0 species. So in the middle, you have this curve. And that's a general relationship that biologists have found over the world over the last 50 years or so. Now, that simple graph tells a couple of very fundamental things on biodiversity and how we think about it and manage it. So number one, imagine this curve again. If you lose about 50% of your habitat, let's say Malaysia now has about 50% of the habitat it had, forest habitat, about 100 years ago. So without doing anything, you will lose about 10%. About 10% of your species will disappear. That doesn't happen immediately. You don't suddenly get species going extinct. The process will go on over hundreds of years. So that, for example, is why you don't find elephants or tigers, these big animals, in small forest areas. Because the basic point is there's not enough habitat to sustain a reproducing population. So that's one thing. The other thing you see on this sort of imaginary graph is that actually most species will survive. I mean, I'm not in any way underestimating the future issues we will have with climate change, more rain, probably more storms, high temperatures in the Malaysian context, as our example here. Not underestimating that at all. But many species will robust and will survive. So there's two little things straight away. So number one is, if you want to conserve biodiversity, you tend to need to think about those the species at risk, those big mammals like tigers, elephants, and so on. You may also need to think about rare trees or orchids or butterflies. Same sort of thing applies. But the point is the focus on our attention, if the purpose is to minimize species extinctions, focus on programs that will sustain those more sensitive species at risk, and don't worry too much about the roughly 50 or 60% that are going to survive anyway. And in that context, I just want to mention this term biodiversity. It's an interesting and very fundamental concept, but it's a very new one. When I started out in my line in the 1970s, the name biodiversity didn't exist. We tended to use the word nature conservation, wildlife, things like that. Nowadays, wildlife, we tend to think of large animals, but in general, the old term would be wildlife and nature. And I mention that because biodiversity is a great term, but it's almost like the words environment or sustainability. It's actually too broad to be very meaningful. And what I've seen over the last sort of 20 years, not only in Malaysia, but globally, is a sort of a focus on let's maintain diversity. Whereas in fact, if you understood what I said just now, what we should focus on is the species that are most threatened, most at risk in our programs. And on that, I mentioned the word programs. On that, what I'd like to say is that focused intervention programs. So let's take the tiger. It doesn't have to be tiger. It could, as I say, it could be a dipterocarp tree or an insect, but let's take tigers. If one wants to prevent the extinction of tigers, which many people in Malaysia do, straight away we need to think of what really needs to be done. The emphasis in the last 20 years on tigers has been to reduce poaching, reduce illegal killing of tigers, which is great. That's very much needs to be done. But if I might use this sort of maybe slightly unkind metaphor, if you have a situation, say a supply chain of any product from production, whether it's an agricultural product, the field comes from the plantation, this process goes through the factories, goes through processing again, exported, goes into products. There's a whole supply chain. And if you want to manage a supply chain, you do want to prevent shoplifters in supermarkets stealing the product. But you also need to look at the entire supply chain if you want to manage that situation. Similarly, in the case of tigers or any other wildlife, if you only look at preventing poaching or stopping people doing things, you've just got one end of the spectrum you need to attend to. So in the case of tigers, if you look very carefully, what you'll find is their limiting factor very probably is food, their food. Now, tigers can eat mice or dogs, and sometimes they do, but their preferred prey animals are deer and wild pigs. That's what they're evolved, that's what they're designed to go for. So if you remove the productivity of those wild deer and wild pigs, you inevitably suppress and keep the very, very low tiger population. And indeed, if you read in the media, say just the last few years, we've seen several cases of tigers coming out, being run over on highways or being killed in the villages because the tiger's eaten someone's cow, those sort of things. And the single main reason tigers are coming out in Malaysia in the last few years, really they don't have enough food. Partly that is the wild population of deer have been suppressed over many centuries of hunting, partly because habitat in hill forests, the habitat in hill forests is not really ideal for deer. Deer like low, flat, fertile lands. And a few years ago, there was something called African swine fever, which wiped out wild pigs in Malaysia and other parts of Southeast Asia. So essentially, the threat to tigers, as I see it now, they do not have enough productivity of their prey base. So that's the sort of thing we need to address. So I give that as an example. And to summarize, I'd say when we think of biodiversity, don't think too much of diversity. Don't think of species lists. Think of species, think of targeted programs. And on my ending on this particular topic on biodiversity is this. A lot of that work is, whether we like it or not, done by non-governmental organizations. Government has, of course, a fundamental and legal role to play. A lot of the hard grind on the ground, whether that be tigers or any other species of wildlife or plant, small groups of passionate people are really key to implementing those programs. And I, as a person who operates a small NGO over 30 years or so now in Malaysia, we really struggle to get basically funding. That's the main one. We struggle to get grants, small grants to continue from year to year. We often lack public policy support. So for example, in the Sabah case, we're planting grasslands for elephants to eat. So the elephants will tend not to go in the oil palm, but will go into the grasslands. We don't have any formal policy support from that. So to summarize there, if you want to have these programs to prevent extinctions, focus a lot on small groups of passionate people. And somehow, actually, as long as this is legal and ethical, the mechanism and process doesn't really matter. But think in terms of supporting very targeted programs operated by passionate people over periods of 5 or 10 years. Funding something for 1 or 2 years is not really enough to get anything going. And finally, I just want to quickly, in the time available, mention resilience. I think the thing about resilience is you can't really plan, you can't do risk analysis, academic or otherwise, the thing about resilience is everyone needs to have some ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And the problem there, of course, is we don't know what it's going to be. We had the African swine fever affecting the pigs 3 years ago, and we had COVID-19 affecting people 4 years ago. And epidemic diseases can wipe out and affect things anytime. They can affect tree crops, agricultural crops, undermine whole industries. Okay, so just to summarize, I would summarize small groups of passionate people deserve support, both from government and from industry. Yeah, let's say the broader industry and the financial industry as well. Support them, think of targeted programs, and finally, on resilience, realize that there's going to be a lot of unpredictables. Often it's just best to think of an idea, justify it, do it, and expect that some of the time you've got it wrong, some of the time you've got it right. I think that's what I'd like to say. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and passion with us, Datuk John. We are now ready to move on to our second panel of the day. This session is moderated by Ian Monroe, President and Chief Investment Officer of Teoh Capital, who will be joined by Ms. Chia Yangan, Communications Manager and Impact Investment Researcher at Tonic, Ms. Cynthia Ong, Chief Executive Facilitator for Forever Sabah, and Ms. Jenifer, Executive Director Asia at Payne. Ian, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ian Monroe, and I'm the president of Teoh Capital, an investment firm that invests in the most climate efficient and sustainable companies around the world. I also have worked on climate solution projects around the world and taught for over a decade at Stanford University and other places courses on climate solutions, and recently wrote a book called Solving Climate Change, which is all about scaling up solutions to climate change. I'm also quite honored to be an advisor for the Climate Governance Malaysia program, and I'm really thrilled to be moderating a panel today with 3 quite inspiring women who are working in different ways, interconnected ways, on scaling up climate solutions in Malaysia and helping these solutions get funding, which of course is one of the most essential pieces of what's needed to get climate solutions to scale. So I will be trying to talk quite little and really letting these inspiring women speak about the work they're doing, and hopefully inspire many of you out there to connect with it and support where you can. With that, I will start by introducing Cynthia Ong, who is working with Forever Sabah, an organization, among other things, working on climate resilience and climate mitigation solutions around Sabah. So Cynthia, can you tell us a bit more about what you do and also why you do it? What inspired you to get into this work?
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia. The organization that I run is called Forever Sabah. It's a civil society organization focused on building what we call the diversified, equitable, circular economy in the Malaysian state of Sabah on the island of Borneo. I do what I do, I think because I grew up in and around nature, just surrounded by nature all the time. And in my lifetime, I've seen that shift dramatically. And I see kids now kind of growing up in front of screens. I'd like to see kids knowing their fruit trees, knowing the fish in the sea and fish in the river. And I see so very little of that. And I hope that somehow we can reverse that in this lifetime.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive much deeper into the work that you're doing, because it really is quite inspiring and important. And another one of our wonderful panelists today also is Malaysian, but on the peninsular side of Malaysia, with the hometown of Malacca. So Chia, can you tell us a bit more about what you do kind of in the big international picture connected up to funding solutions to climate change, and then also your own personal entrepreneurial journey and working as a social entrepreneur yourself?
Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction, Ian. My name is Gia. I am from small town. I always say small town in Malacca. It's not that small anymore. And in my role at Tonic, we help private individuals and investors move capital towards impact. We are not picky. We move across the spectrum of capital, across all asset classes, and also across all impact themes. But in my personal capacity, I'm very connected to Malacca and Malaysia. Just I think earlier this year, I took Ian on what we call the climate disaster tour in Malacca, because essentially, maybe not so much like Cynthia, I didn't grow up in nature, but what I realized growing up is that the beach that we used to go to are now landfill with buildings that are abandoned. The mangrove forest that used to line the coast of Malacca has now been ripped apart. And coming after working and learning and living abroad for many years, coming back with these different lands, it was quite devastating and sad. And it started making me ponder about what I can do as an individual, or who I can bring along in this journey to rectify what has been done. And Cynthia, you talked about this mind shift, and something really stark that struck me was the difference between my parents and myself. So we drove past a really big Bodhi tree one day. It's close to my house, and I was telling my mom, "Look, that tree, it's so big, it's so old." And she's like, "Yeah, it's so big, it's occupying the space for our house." And I was like, "Excuse me." But this is just the mindset, right? For her growing up, in a developing nation, like all these infrastructure and development is enough progress. But for me, like I want to go back to small, living. I want to go back to a walkable city. I want to go back to, connectedness with humans and nature. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think all of us are here for it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story and perspective, and excited to dive deeper with you too. Last but certainly not least, we have a non-Malaysian but Malaysian adjacent, Chinhi, as a Singaporean, but also looking quite seriously about funding solutions in Malaysia. Tell us a bit about your work in the climate solutions and climate funding space, and how it connects up to what is going on in Malaysia, or at least could go on in Malaysia in terms of scaling up and funding climate solutions.
Thanks so much, Ian. Nice to have the rest of my panelists here, Cynthia and Chia as well. So I'm not entirely non-Malaysian. I do have a bit of Malaysian heritage, but I think what does disqualify me from being here is that I am from the outside looking in from Singapore. And I think what we wish we had more of, Malaysia has plenty. And we can go into that a little bit later. But I think what brings me here in respect to Twinem, we are a climate tech venture capital firm. We've been investing in climate technologies for about 25 years now. And I've been recently brought on board the team to lead its Asia strategy. And what that means to me is a lot. I think it's a huge task because Asia has such rich diversity of opportunities. The space is one where if we were to traverse without sufficient care, that it loses the dignity that it ought to have. And in respect to that, then it's how do we also ensure that while we participate in what venture capital as a tool allows us to do, how do we also help to uplift? In addition to my work at Twinem, I do also head up Haltumor Asia Pacific, which is a little bit like a non-governmental organization, started off as a nonprofit organization. What we do is we support the translation of research to real companies, and that surrounds deep technologies of all industries. We're entirely agnostic, and to me, with the innovation lens, I think it's quite interesting what Malaysia presents itself as in terms of opportunity for adoption and deployment of climate technologies and many more really at scale. So to answer Ian's question of why, maybe why I care for what this represents, is that I can't see any other way I would like for us to, as humans, exist on this planet. I wish we were a lot more symbiotic with our larger environment and had such deeper respect for everybody else that we share the planet with. And that exceeds just us as humans, right? There is so much biodiversity, and we take that for granted. So like Chad's earlier point about the tree, they're so precious. Here, we actually, in the middle of the CBD, we actually compute how much economic value each large tree sits on in terms of real estate, and maybe not have to financialize everything. Nature has its own inherent value, and we can talk about that later too.
So thank you for the introductions and scratching the surface, at least, of the work that you're doing. I'd love to get into it a bit more in depth and how it's interconnected together. Shinya, I know you have some specific thoughts and work around investing in Malaysia and the climate landscape there. Is there more detail you can get into?
Sure. I think beyond just investing, so we're commissioned to do some work around mapping the Malaysian innovation ecosystem. So I thought maybe, I could start with that so we can have a bit of lay of the land around what the opportunity space looks like. In relation to Malaysia, I think one of the things that I most like about it is that it's culturally very enterprising. You have a lot of small, medium-sized businesses. There are plenty of under the radar owners and operators of highly successful businesses. But one thing to note is that there is a bit of a talent gap, especially because your local talent development doesn't quite translate to societal participation and innovation. So I think that's certainly something that a lot more collaboration could definitely help build much better teams for this to take place. Another point is one thing we don't see as much of is really research and industry collaborations. So this has also yielded an historically poor commercialization of technologies. But what's interesting is that there's also very deep and mature industry from agriculture to advanced manufacturing, and this really represents immense opportunity for Malaysia to participate in the green economy of the future. I want to talk a little bit more about the policy landscape, because I think a lot of climate has to be driven by policy. In Malaysia, it's very nuanced. It is largely supported really by government enthusiasm for entrepreneurship and decarbonization. I've got a couple of points, so bear with my monologue for the next 2 or 3 minutes. One thing we found was that venture capital was largely driven by government in Malaysia. For instance, in 2022, the government contributed to more than 1/3 of total venture investments in Malaysia. And I hope that this is actually seen as a wider call really for greater action to attract more private sector funding. And then we can talk about this later too. Very encouraging, however, is that the Ministry of Science, Tech and Innovation has developed also roadmaps and action plans for the advancement of its namesake, with an aim to transform Malaysia into a global top 20 startup ecosystem by 2030. Clean energy, obviously, is a strategic sector of focus under Malaysia's startup ecosystem roadmap. The innovation ecosystem, however, is still quite nascent, where you see only very few solutions that would have been developed and scaled domestically. policies and programs that have been driven by government also appear to be relatively pilot scale, with relatively little emphasis on building a self-sustaining private sector driven ecosystem. So I think this really is an invitation for so many more to come and participate in this space. Much more coordination is definitely necessary. Decarbonization projects are also undertaken by state-owned actors, and energy policies, energy transition policies are in place. You see a lot of industry participation and leadership, such as the likes of Petronas and Tenaga. And encouragingly, there's also a commitment to, by 2050, if I recall correctly, increase renewable energy composition to 70% of total generation capacity. And Sarawak has been slated to be a regional, renewable energy powerhouse. And that's also where the government has adopted the most ambitious climate initiatives. They've announced targets of 70% renewable energy use by 2030. They're looking at exploring floating solar farms, pumped storage hydroelectricity, and biomass power generation. One more point here is that the National Energy Transition Roadmap has actually identified 6 technological transition levers to help them to achieve their targets set out in their national energy policy. So among these are energy efficiency, bioenergy, green mobility, renewable energy, hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, what we call CCUS. And they've also set aside $100 million fund to support blended finance to fund energy transition projects that are what they call marginally bankable. And I wanted to just round this point up with a note on how economically reliant Malaysia has been on fossil fuels, traditionally speaking. The oil and gas industry has been a significant contributor to government revenue. So it really does represent a significant hurdle in scaling energy innovations, really, because you can't do so with any form of green premiums. So that kind of wraps up my overarching Malaysia ecosystem view.
Thanks, Jinyi, and that's a great lot of pieces. We can dive down some different rabbit holes on the big picture and how the big picture fits into the realities on the ground. And I think that's a great transition to you, Cynthia, as you are on the ground, have been working at a very local grassroots level in some challenging environments where you really have to take a lot of different considerations into account and get a number of stakeholders on board as you move forward. So Cynthia, can you tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing in Sabah and how it fits into climate resilience and also climate pollution mitigation and the interconnection and the need to have it funded and coordinated?
Thank you. I would love to share the Sabah story. Sorry, I'm just recovering from a cough here. So we're located, I think I said that earlier, in the northernmost tip of the island of Borneo. It's about a state about the size of Scotland, very much at a cusp, developmentally, economically, ecologically. We were recently identified in a World Bank report as the most lagging of the lagging states in Malaysia. So that's very lagging. So let me bring up my slide deck. Can you see this?
Yes.
So we embarked on a climate scenario mapping of Sabah and actually of Borneo to understand, what future are we looking into by mid-century and by end of century, using the IPCC reports and downscaled data. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later. About 30 layers, from human heat stress to precipitation, potential evapotranspiration ratios, which basically shows moisture stress for example, forests as well as agriculture, rice yields, fire risk, coastal flooding, storm surges, and fish biomass. Just really trying to understand what our impact's going to look like mid-century and end of century. Oh, wait a minute. Why is this not moving? Can you see this?
Yep.
So this is the how-to. We took Earth system models, of which there are many. We took 5. And then using downscale data by WSL and Switzerland and NASA, we then cropped it to Borneo and to Sabah and developed code to look at climate extreme indices and impact layers. And then from there, went to the ground, if you can see the picture on the right, to sort of ground truth amongst communities to see, is this what you're facing? Is this something like what's happening here? What are you already doing? So here's an example of a layer. So this is the wet bulb globe temperature map. If you look at the track that we're on, which is shared socioeconomic pathway 2.45, you've got the end of century map there looking really quite dramatic. A lot of blacks and reds, so high threat, extreme threat in terms of workers outdoors. And that's everybody from forestry folks, palm oil folks, rubber, agriculture. And then of course the SSP 3.7 with the end of century picture is even worse. Fire risk, of course, is off the charts. All these areas that you see in red, yellow are forested areas, mangrove areas. And, some of those areas would have, like a fire management regime in place, which would help, but for the most part, protected areas will not. So they would be very much in danger. Here's an example of something we're doing. We, with financing from the UK, we embarked on this roadmap process a couple of years ago, where we identified every unelectrified community in Sabah and came to 400. So 400 communities in Sabah are unelectrified. And we surveyed 206 of them, really looking at where they are, their aspirations, where they'd like to go, the kinds of local economies they'd like to grow. And then we did technical feasibility studies to see what was possible and viable with regards to renewable energy mini grids. So these are not connected to the main grid. This would be small scale mini grids run by the communities themselves. So we designed for the 200 plus villages these systems, costed them, built a financial model, and we're ready to roll now in phase 1 at a pilot stage with philanthropic funding, building 7 systems, and we're kind of poised to scale, pre-scale into phase 2 and then scale into phase 3. The question, of course, is how? How do we find the financing for these systems? But apart from that, also just going back to the climate scenario mapping that we did, we want to take that across the state. We want to listen to communities on the ground, understand what's already happening, what have they been contending with. We found from preliminary ground truthing excursions that it's already happening. What's forecasted for mid-century is already happening. Folks are already adapting to different crops, different work schedules, different patterns, different practices. We'd like to learn from those experiences on the ground, lived experiences, and feed that into policy making, into strategy, into law. And then, how do we implement when capacity is and literacy is low and financing is almost non-existent at the governmental level? So this is what we're grappling with, and I'm putting this to the group, perhaps, something we can discuss.
Well, continuing with that, So both Chia and Chinyi, you represent the global funder community to a certain extent, where Tonic, which you are a part of, Chia, is, as far as I'm aware, really the preeminent global network of impact investors and philanthropists who are generally wealthy family offices that individuals have gotten to the point where they realize they have more than the money they'll ever need, and it's really about how can I maximize good with it. And then Shinyi, to a certain extent, you're more directly VC focused, and have LPs, I assume, you attract into it that also are mission aligned in this deep tech climate thesis. What do you think the role should be for private philanthropy, private early stage venture angel funding in the supporting the kind of work that Cynthia is doing on the ground, and what are some of the things that would make that capital flow more freely?
I think a really interesting point thing you mentioned earlier is about the percentage of government versus private funding in the venture capital scene in Malaysia. And it's really interesting for me because in my line of work, the individuals and family offices always believe that because they have less restrictions on their personal investments, that they could lead by example, that they could make, catalytic capital investments or patient capital investments to signal that this is a possibility, that it could still be profitable in the long run. And then Cynthia, when you mentioned that, the lack of government funding isn't there and you're seeking philanthropic funds, perhaps I think to make such a project or such a change happen, you need both, not all projects can be investable, and that's when you need, to use your philanthropic capital. But there are possible structures or models that you can consider where you could attract the catalytic or the philanthropic funding in phase one, and perhaps consider different types of funding model for the different phases when the project is more established, and you can see a clearer return on capital in the horizon.
And Cynthia, I was impressed. You've already done some work with academic collaborators, including in my backyard here, University of California, Berkeley, finding that even from the economics a few years ago, with how cheap solar energy is now and battery systems to level it out and mixed with hydro and biomass, already these mini grid, microgrid, 100% clean energy systems, if you're honest about the accounting, are cheaper than the current fossil fuel subsidized systems, even just dollars and cents, not even getting into environmental and human health externalities around those existing fossil fuel systems. But what is it that when you have the math that just shows, hey, there's a pretty near-term economic payback period on this, what are the biggest barriers? I guess maybe Chinyi, I'll toss it to you. What are the biggest barriers you think really holding back that capital from just making what should be really sound, obvious economic investments to fund this kind of work?
That's a golden question, isn't it? So I think one of the first things I do have to acknowledge is that venture capital, which is what I have to deploy, is a very specific tool. And there are very specific expectations around that, because venture capital is typically non-concessionary. They expect market rate returns. And I think that's what we contend with when we want to maximize impact aside from just financial returns. It's not been set up for what we would like it to do within the climate space. However, one of the things worth calling out is that, at least at Twinem, our perspective around climate technology investments is that it cannot be simply a solution that's better for the climate without any other core benefit. It has to be fundamentally a better way of doing things. It has to beat out the incumbents. And the climate benefit is a feature. That's because I think if we want to see wide-scale adoption and deployment of the kinds of solutions that we absolutely needed years ago, then we need to also understand what the incentive mechanisms have been that have caused these to not have been adopted in the first place. So if it comes at a green premium, then it necessarily precludes a lot of communities from being able to access these kinds of technologies. So these cannot be luxury. They have to work within the local context with what people can afford. If we want to be able to scale the change that these kinds of technologies represent, then we'll have to be clever about it and have these be just a better way forward. And it has to mean progress, not necessarily in the form of buildings replacing trees, but it has to be universal progress for all. And the inclusivity that needs to be inherent to every one of these product designs, I think that's something that we really cannot take for granted. If we want to then figure out how to unlock more capital for these kinds of solutions to scale, then I think maybe the best way forward is to identify what could be technologies that are already mature and that have already attained the unit economics that would make it make sense in a very local context, and have these be able to be supported by a whole range of different types of capital providers. And that's way more than just venture capital. Venture capital takes a very specific risk around technology and go-to-market. A lot more of the commercialization risks are there. But if we're talking about being able to scale these kinds of solutions for communities that have needed them way before, and these are technologies that are already mature and ripe for adoption, then that's actually not venture capital's role to play. It's a lot more infrastructure, project financing. We'll also definitely need a lot more government participation in order to also lend greater confidence to private sector capital.
So that really connects back a bit to what you were sharing, Jinyi, about the high level progress, at least in terms of policy targets that's been made in Malaysia recently. But I'm curious, Cynthia and Chia, working on the ground with the existing policies like the National Energy Transition Roadmap and now the new climate change policy that's being drafted. What is the role policy should be playing? What are the biggest roadblocks that really need to be moved to just help that capital flow into getting 100% clean energy that already, again, dollars and cents, it's just saving money, but maybe it's not saving money if fossil fuels are still subsidized to the point that they're artificially cheaper than effectively they should be. So Cynthia, what's your thoughts around how you'd like to see that the existing policy landscape and whether it's adequately supporting this work and what you would love to see maybe improved to help things flow better funding wise and just getting things done?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think everything is so entangled. It's a little bit like, when you have a mass of entanglement, like you're trying to find the start of one of these threads. It's very hard. I think my strategy is just to start today with what's on my table now. So we received the new climate bill, or rather the sort of proposed framework for the new climate bill for Malaysia. And it was shared around amongst civil society for feedback. And we were given something like a month. It was there was very little for us to feedback on because it was quite general, quite high level. We didn't get to see the whole document. They say that they address certain issues and certain details in the main document, but we didn't get to see that document, so we asked for it. I think for us as a state, as a key actor in the mix, with more than 50% forests, we're a key player in conservation. We shouldn't just be consulted. We should be at the design table. We should be in on the conversation from the very beginning, from the moment, it's decided we need to have this conversation. Organizing across sectors, as a response, we just find that not easy in a situation where institutions, organizations are just building literacy and building capacity around the subject matters. I guess the word that comes to me is entanglement. And the system is so hardwired to behave in a particular way. For example, with the mini grids, we've had to insert ourselves into the conversation as Sabah takes over energy regulation from it being a federal power. We say we'd like to build a framework for policy and regulation in this space, the mini grid with renewable space. And we had to start the conversation from scratch because they say, folks are saying, what space? So what space is that? They'd never heard of it. So it was building literacy from scratch. What are mini grids? What are mini grids with renewables? How would they be built? Who would own them? How would they be financed? And then, what the safety, quality assurance look like.
And I imagine just a lot of education around where the technology and economics are now too, which is just so different than it was a decade ago. Solar is 80% cheaper, basically. Batteries 90% cheaper or more, and the projections are just going cheaper and cheaper. So again, what you thought you may have known with the economics of fossil fuels versus renewables from a decade ago, or even 5 years ago, or even a year ago, may have totally changed with where the technology is now. How would you ideally like to see, as you mentioned, for national climate change policy, you and a number of other stakeholders, your strong preference would be to be at the table much sooner and really the ideating phase. How, in your ideal world, what do you think that process should be? Because you certainly, in terms of climate impacts, you've already painted a pretty harrowing picture of where Sabah and assumedly most of Malaysia is heading in terms of just literally unsurvivable heat with wet bulb temperatures and areas really subject to constant burning in ways that have never happened before. And that's just very much hits home for me, where my own family farm in Northern California was in the middle of one of these huge wildfires, and year after year we're seeing things we didn't think possible, even in places like Hawaii, right, where we had this devastating fire that wiped out an entire city in Maui. So where do you feel like really climate policy should be being made with a bigger multi-stakeholder process?
Well, I shared earlier that we took the maps, we kind of zeroed in on, okay, this looks really terrible here and it looks really terrible over there. Let's go visit them. let's find out what's really happening on the ground for rice farmers, for fishers, for forest living communities. And what we found, to our surprise, was they're already experiencing those extremes. And also, they're already, as I said, mitigating and adapting. No one told them. They don't call it climate change. They say, you know, I plant something and it's a crapshoot. It's either going to be drought or it's going to be floods. And we're now contending with one or the other. So we, instead of planting 6-month rice, we plant 3-month rice. You know, we used to work from this time to this time in the day, and then this time to this time, and they've changed that to going to work early in the morning, coming back mid-morning, leaving the afternoons free, and then late afternoon to early evening. All these things that we thought would happen sort of mid-century. So I think what's both heartbreaking but also hopeful is that the ecosystem of which these folks are part of are already responding. And I think they know how to respond. They live closely, you know, where the rubber meets the road, and they have an inbuilt immune system, and they seem to know what to do. And I'd like to hear from these voices. I'd like to hear from more and more of these voices. I'd like to take all the themes of how they're responding, and I'd like to feed that into policy. I'd like to feed that into law. Because us in our air-conditioned offices, we're not having those lived experiences. You know, we're just trying to understand the fine print, trying to understand the science and IPCC reports, but there's some real knowledge being built on the ground. And I think those have to somehow be fed into, you know, into the mix.
Most definitely. And I will say I've been extremely impressed with, just within the last couple of years, the organization that Climate Governance Malaysia has brought together to try to get more diverse voices directly working with policymakers. And the Climate Governance Initiative came out of World Economic Forum, but the team in Malaysia in particular, I think is really, according to the women at World Economic Forum running it, the furthest ahead of any climate governance program in the world in terms of really connecting up the highest level policymakers with not just corporate voices, but also civil society and experts on the ground. So really encourage all of you to engage with through Climate Governance Malaysia to make sure your own voices are heard, as well as those you're working with and other organizations that you feel like really need to get in expertise to the rooms where things are being drafted and the details. It's all, the devil's always in the details, right? The high level can always look great, but once you get down to how things are defined and where funds are allocated, and what poison pill clauses may be inserted in there. That also relates, I feel like, to some of the experience. I've only spent a little bit of time in Malacca, but it was quite enjoyable and educational, touring around a bit with Chia and her family. And certainly in Malacca, Chia, you touched on it a little bit, but I'd love for you to go into a little bit more detail. In Malacca, you know, a hub of international trade for centuries and cross-cultural pollination. There's a lot of good. There's a thriving tourist industry. There's some quite successful foreign direct investment, but you've also seen destruction in terms of the environment in ways that's been disturbing for you and many others, and just frankly poorly thought out, quite large investments gone wrong. So I'd love to have you share a little bit of what you've seen, not even just specific to climate investment, because I feel like a lot of the lessons learned, for better, for worse, that you've experienced in Malacca also can apply to what we should be doing with stakeholder engagement and climate investing.
Yeah, I think what could be changed in terms of like policy level also is like what Timmy said, you know, the price of the real estate of a tree in Singapore. I would urge you know, that we consider the cost or the value of the natural ecosystem that surrounds us and factor that into, you know, developmental conversations. You know, when they're, you know, putting in this I keep calling them landfills, but you know, when they like make a fake island and like the coastal damage that has been done, and how that then, you know, in the long run for government incurs higher costs through, you know, flood risk, fire risk, drought risk that Cynthia is talking about. You know, it's all related in this big entanglement, and you can't, you know, it's a bit ironic as a state government, because we are having all these big development projects that are extractive, and on the other hand, next year Malacca is the Sustainable Tourism City of 2025, which then they are trying to I think they said one of the best snorkeling sites is off one of the islands in Malacca, and I was like, are you sure? With all of the projects that's been going on, I don't think there's much of these coral reefs left anymore. And if anyone has been in or lived long enough in Malacca, you know that every time it rains for more than 3 hours, parts of the city is flooded already. So what will the next 20 years be? We won't know. But there are a lot of stakeholders involved, Ian, that there's been a big pushback in terms of these overdevelopment. I always say I grew up in a small town, but you see more and more of these mega projects. You know, all of the pieces come into play, you know, urban planning, better city management, you know, factoring the climate resilience investing, all of these pieces need to come together. So yeah, I also encourage people to look at things, you know, in a different lens. You know, when I started, you know, it's when I talk about my parents and their generation, looking at things as a development, economic development, and then from our age at least, you know, this mindset change. What is development? What do we want to develop into? I was recently participating in like a futures project where you like sit and you imagine and envision, you know, what kind of future are we all working towards? Is it something that what Elon Musk is talking about, where everything is technological, you know, everything is grown in a lab, you know, you have all of your Kobe beef grown in a lab? Is this the kind of future we want to work towards? Or is it something more like, you know, you consume what you should, you live off the land, but you're not extracting from it? You know, I feel as a society have all of this very dystopian imagination of the future, and but we are still progressing towards in what kind of future are we trying to have, because that affects the kind of decisions that we need to make today.
Well, I think that question is actually one I'd love to flesh out a bit for all of you. Is basically thinking, let's say 2050, since that's tossed out there a lot as a climate target, although I frequently am harping on the fact that net zero by 2050, that's what the science said 20 plus years ago. As a globe, because there's another 20 years of climate pollution in the atmosphere, we really need net zero by at the latest 2040, and probably more like 2035 now, because every year we delay and the drawdown of pollution is just more up there, and faster decarbonization to net zero and beyond to net positive. But let's take 2050. Take that as a target. So effectively 25 years from now, what do you see as success? What is the vision for the future that you would like to see? And the Malacca you imagine, and then Cynthia for you, the Sabah, and Xinyi for you, Singapore, and how it connects with what's going on in Malaysia as well.
That's a loaded one. Yeah, why don't we start with you two?
Who wants to take that first?
I'm happy to go. Well, I think we put our vision out with Forever Sabah and the transition towards a diversified, equitable, circular economy. I think that's what we'd like to see, where there's inclusion, voices are, heard at the mat. We often say the mat as opposed to the table, because culturally it used to be the mat before colonization. I think we'd like to see us, grieving together, having the conversations we need to be having. I always remember the line from the movie Don't Look Up, where DiCaprio says at the end something like, "We really did have everything, didn't we?" I think that's so powerful. So we've been ourselves amongst our own team of about 70, convening, gathering, and going there, going to the hard conversations, looking at these maps and saying, look, who are going to be the most impacted, and let's reach out to them, and let's sit with them, and let's be anxious together, despair together, grieve together, and then work on, where to from here. I think the danger, what scares me is when we're not talking about it.
Yeah, very much resonated with that. Either Shinyi or Chia, do you want to endeavor to give us your vision for the future? But I hope is a bit beyond grieving too, that we certainly need to talk about the awful possibilities and even the climate damages that already are to a certain extent irreversible. And it was the nightmare of wildfire destroying my family's small farm in Northern California, literally nightmares I would have as a kid, that got me understanding the science and working on climate solutions around the world. And also realizing that we're all in this together. There's no way to solve climate change without doing it collectively as a globe, which also is, I think, an amazing silver lining, that it gives us a real reason to actually be working together on this great human project of trying to take out our trash effectively that we've put up in the atmosphere. And for my community, that nightmare has come to pass in 2017, now 7 years ago. But now it's just trying to make it a livable future so it doesn't happen over and over again into more and more communities. And so to a certain extent, the damage is done, but there's still, it's never too late to make the future better. An analogy I love is it's never too late to stop punching ourselves in the face. So on that note, what is that better future, either Chia or Shinyi, that you envision for your own home and the people and places you love?
I'll try to keep mine relatively short, but when I started working in the impact investing field as part of my interview, I asked my CEO kind of like, where do you envision Tonic to be in 20 years? And he said, Adam, if you haven't met him, said, in my future, Tonic wouldn't exist. And I was like, do I need to look for a new job? But what he meant was that in the future, all investments are made already with impact, that you don't need a special community to lead the way, to encourage people to think about other things besides financial return. And I think that's a beautiful picture to paint in the future, that you don't have to tell people or consider all of these as concessionary returns, but to, it's a matter of fact. This is like, seeing how you started the conversation today, it's the only way to the future. So it's the should be way of life.
I love that. When when I started Hello Tomorrow here as well, it was because we see ourselves as ecosystem builders, and so much of that work is inorganic. It means that you have to activate an ecosystem because it doesn't yet quite exist the way it should. It's still inefficient. And to me, the only way forward, or the future that I would have envisioned for us as an organization, was if we didn't have to do it anymore, because an ecosystem, which by virtue of its very own definition is one that's thriving and natural, and it just goes on. It does not require a facilitator. And I'm hoping as well for a future where if we were to recalibrate how we think about what matters, and hence how we protect what matters, that what we would choose would never be ourselves. It would always be the people around us, the environment that we have around us, and to hold all of that so close that if we were to always make our decisions and decide how we would act based off of somebody else's or what somebody else would then receive as an outcome of your actions and decisions, that if that would be our primary motivation and what guides our actions, that I think that would be a beautiful world in which to live. When I saw Cynthia's slides, I think it was a very rude awakening to see that, you know, in just decades from now, people who are alive today will see that future if we don't do anything about it. And it's not just future lives that we're talking about. The Earth, this planet, will continue to be here in whatever form it will. It's just whether or not we're still in it. And by we, it's not just our generation or the people now, but we as a human race, and the species around. Our planet has been here for millions and millions of years. It will outlast us. And this is us determining our own fate and deciding whether or not we want to be on the planet's good side. So I think there's no more urgent time to do something about it now, because we're already late. And the future that's otherwise shown in Cynthia's slides, oh, God forbid that happen. We need to change that reality if that's what it is.
And I do think a lot of it comes down to data ultimately empowering us to vote with our money all the time, really, not just where we invest, but where we bank, the products that we buy. Having the data that shows how those financial flows connect up to the future we want or we don't want, I think is one of the biggest missing pieces. And it's certainly a core piece of what we're doing in the public equity space with Etho Capital, trying to help everybody just invest their retirement funds in public markets in the future that we want. And I know you're working in the angel and venture space there as well. But in my ideal world, even just my bank account, you mentioned, Shani, that for Cynthia's projects is really, it should just be project finance bankability, right? Where you have investments in renewable energy that just pay for themselves over time. They're not going to have a venture type 100x return, but they're going to have a very healthy, solid investment return. I helped found something called the Climate Positive Investing Alliance, positiveclimate.org for anybody who's interested in joining us, where we're all about connecting up capital with climate solutions, and one of our members is actually in the banking space, a bank called Atmos Financial, where I have my personal checking account with them, and then that money just funds renewable energy projects here in the US, but I would love to be able to, be funding renewable energy projects like in Sabah as well. So I think the data innovation and the financial flows innovation really can empower a lot of this continuous transition to, as you said, Chia, effectively making our roles in these kind of conversations obsolete, because I really do think most people want effectively the same healthy, sustainable, thriving future. There are some outliers that are benefiting from the status quo, while the vast majority of us are not. But if we can tweak that data landscape and tweak the financial flows. So I think we've got 3 more minutes. So in 1 minute or less, I would love just if there is one thing, if you could wave a magic wand to help change things to direct the future you'd like to see. Cynthia, I'll start with you. What would it be?
I thought we'd done that already.
You can vote twice.
Well, awareness. I know that's not very interesting, but I really do believe
Yeah.
that that's fundamental. And then agency that comes from having awareness, a sense of
And
agency.
getting,
Yeah.
and getting broader stakeholders at the table for these key decisions. Kia, over to you.
I think we talked a lot about external financial policy, but I think if I had a magic wand, I still feel like nothing would change if there was not a mindset change. So if my magic wand could magically make everyone reflect internally and think about what is their motivations for doing things and how much would be enough for them, right? A lot of these development or like capital desires to become rich, but like how much is enough? Like you need to. I feel like we have encouraged over the last decades this mindset of like accumulation and more and bigger and better, but I would wish that people would stop for a moment and be like, no, I have enough. This is good, and then we can work together on how we can rather give back to each other, to our communities, or to our societies, or to Mother Nature.
So I think I've been
Amen.
very privileged to have met people who are exactly like that. Not that they have a lot, but they have enough, and their contentment is something I'll always be, so inspired by, because then to them it's, I have enough, I have more than enough, and I have more than most, and I have so much to give. And I wish, we all had that mindset. But if I had my way with it, maybe one of the first things I wish for would really be, as I mentioned before, to definancialize the climate transition and the resultant social outcomes, so that the question of who pays for this no longer needs to be asked. It just has to be the way. And I think when we overly financialize everything to the point that we try to put a price tag on biodiversity or a price tag on carbon and all of these in order to evoke change, I think it corrupts the system. It corrupts the underlying intentions, and it holds us back from evolution. So that's mine.
I agree there as well. And I will just toss in that it's been wonderful for talking with all of you. I thank you again for taking your time. And I don't think I even mentioned, but I'm currently in San Francisco, California. Chia's in South Africa at the moment, Cynthia in Sabah, and Shinyi in Singapore. So we come to you from 3 continents and 4 different countries at the moment. And it's pretty remarkable that we have the ability to do that. So as they say, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. There are wiggles along the way. It's not always, but I do feel like overall we're in it together when it comes to solving climate change and scaling up these solutions and funding these solutions. And I really am optimistic. I think the biggest magic wand waving I'd like to do right now is just to have everyone realize that at this point, clean energy is just the cheapest, most abundant energy on the planet already. We're at that technological tipping point of massive scale up, and it's only going to become that more and more every day. That's pure dollars and cents. When you get into environmental externalities, it's even more obvious that we should have done this decades ago, but we really are there. So Cynthia, I hope you are able to get all the funding you need and much, much more. And thank you, Chia, Jinyi, for doing what you're doing to move money in the right direction and your own social entrepreneur journeys as well. So thank you, everyone. I'll give one more plug. The textbook I wrote, Solving Climate Change, which has become one of the world's most commonly used climate solution textbooks, is freely available through our publisher for the next few weeks up to December 20th. You can download free copies through the link on solveclimate.org. So anyone who wants to have a book about solving climate change that's meant to be a university textbook, but we have lots of climate philanthropists, investors, and entrepreneurs using it as well. Get it while it's free, because otherwise it's, I don't know, $100 or something on Amazon, which is way too expensive in my opinion.
Or
That's
pay
our
for it. It's
publisher's
worth it.
choice. You can also pay for it too if you want, but you know, free and digital is a better carbon footprint too. With that, thank you again. Any parting thoughts from any of you? All right. Well, thank you. And thanks to Climate Governance in Malaysia for bringing these important conversations together.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. CGM. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all the panelists for sharing their incredible insights. I'd like to now invite Dr. Alizan Mahadi, Senior Economist at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, to wrap up the day with his closing remarks. Over to you.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Alizan.
Okay, as we conclude today's session, I'd like to take a bit of a moment to reflect on the collective wisdom and powerful insights that we've heard throughout the day. I think you'll all agree that this conversation has been quite a remarkable example of the diversity of voices that are driving the future of sustainability and conservation in Malaysia. From our multicultural society to our status as a mega-diverse nation, we are home to some of the most unique and precious ecosystems in the world. But with diversity comes also complexity. And as we've heard from the speakers and the panelists, this complexity is both a challenge and also an opportunity. So often when we think about action on conservation, on climate, on building resilient systems, often we think about, firstly, it's the responsible and the need for authorities that are in charge to take action. And also sometimes we think in terms of the large projects and instruments, including government structures, financing instruments, so on and so forth. And rightly so. Natural resource governance, climate change, it is mired in complex political economy challenges that require incentive mechanisms, compensation, regulations, so on and so forth. But as we've seen today, the responsibility for preserving our natural world is shared by all of us. It's not just about policies, financial capital, it's about people, individuals, communities, and also passionate advocates who are working tirelessly to protect what matters most to all of us. And sometimes in such complexity, we seek these grand solutions and spend more time speaking about the whole and not enough time speaking and thinking about the parts and the potential and some of these parts. So again, indeed, it's very refreshing to hear the diverse voices today and reflect on how they can contribute to sustainability and a more resilient future. And what we heard today is firstly the importance of local action. We learned that real change often comes from the ground up. The voices of those closest to the land, the rivers, the forests are often the most profound. These communities possess invaluable knowledge and intimate understanding of the delicate balance between nature and human activity. The efforts we've heard about today show that community-driven solutions can be very impactful. And secondly, and this is where I really commend the organizers for bringing something maybe a little bit different to really showcase the importance of storytelling. This has been a recurring theme in the discussions today, whether we're talking about, storytelling through the lens of a camera, through the pages of a book, or the voices of community leaders. The ability to convey that richness of nature's natural world is what inspires others to act. We heard that the power of these stories lies not just in their creativity, but in their ability to convey urgency, the urgency of protecting what is at risk of being lost. And as many have said, we are already too late. Also, we were lucky to hear from some of our unsung heroes. These are the local leaders, the writers, conservationists, activists, who in their determination are making a tremendous impact. Again, their stories, their personal narratives that we heard today highlight the connections between people and the environment and reminds us that sustainability is not merely a technical or scientific pursuit, it's also a deeply emotional, spiritual, and personal pursuit. However, saying this, we do have still a a big challenge ahead of us. The reality is that we are still behind and living outside the safe operating space of humanity. When it comes to biodiversity, globally, only about 50% of land and less than 10% of the ocean are protected, and Malaysia is even less than that. This is below the global biodiversity goal to conserve 30% of the earth, land and sea by 2030. And the reality is that people are not putting money into conservation, or at least not enough of it. The biodiversity financing gap is estimated to be at around $700 billion annually, which is needed to reverse and halt biodiversity loss by 2030. In fact, 1.7 trillion of public money is spent on harmful subsidies that work against nature. And the World Bank estimates that the cost of inaction is even higher, with annual losses of 2.7 trillion by 2030. And of course, we all know that we are also not on track to achieve our climate goals. So allow me to just end by just trying to speak about some of the ways forward, especially from today's discussion. Now, the main challenge is we've seen that there are many solutions, but the real challenge is to upscale these solutions. And moving forward, there is a need for a shift, a value shift, a policy shift, and an economic shift. And what is clear from today is that these three shifts are also intertwined with one another. So listening to the speakers and panels today, a few broad ideas that I have is firstly in terms of the financing shift. We've heard, again, these powerful narratives, images that translate to a broader value shift where people value nature at what it is hopefully worth. Can we translate this value shift into a financial shift where people put their money into financing and investment into conservation, into climate action? Often when we speak about financing, we often hear about return on investment, market returns, so on and so forth. Can we speak about, rather than speak about only about market returns, we speak about the logic of the investment in nature and shift that into the need for conserving biodiversity and climate as a global public good. So in other words, can we affect a value shift that will in turn affect this economic shift? Secondly, in terms of policy shift and specifically governance, we speak a lot about collaboration, but can we focus on governance systems that are truly collaborative? We have heard today, some of this happening where governments work with NGOs, civil society, and especially connecting and bridging the local grassroots and experts with government. Now, this is the policy and institutional shift that is required, and there are already examples. For example, we heard cleaning rivers in Selangor, protecting tigers in Pahang, or renewable in Sabah. And we have to learn more from these models, and they need to be replicated and become the norm that deliver focused intervention and programs that carried out by those who are best placed to deliver them. Thirdly, is for this value shift. We heard this, especially in the conclusion of the previous panel, that there is still a need to mainstream, to change mindsets, so on and so forth. So in particular, I think we are unique. We are a mega diverse country, and while Malaysia rightly so has focused on a rapid model of development, we are at the juncture that we need to think about our own mode of development that balances this diversity and complexity. We are moving towards a high-income nation. Hopefully, World Bank estimates by 2028 we'll be a high-income nation. We are currently crafting our 5-year development plan. So this is a real opportunity for Malaysia to embrace our own unique identity that includes nature and diversity. Now, this will require bringing in participation of diverse voices, like we're doing today, and mentioned by many of the panelists. So with that, I would like to thank our incredible speakers, panelists for their powerful insights, stories, and ideas that I think have inspired all of us. Thank you to CGM for always delivering the thought-provoking channels and giving the platform to hear these diverse voices. And thank you to all of you for staying tuned to this panel session today. I think that's it from me. I wish all you an incredible day, and I'll pass it back to Avicenna before we close today's session. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you, Dr. Alizan, for delivering the concluding message. And thank you all for joining today's session on Malaysia's Diverse Voices, all for sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we officially conclude Malaysian support for COP29. We leave inspired by the critical themes that have guided our discussions: the imperative of a just energy transition to ensure an inclusive and equitable shift to sustainability, the potential of green finance and carbon markets to drive systemic change, the innovative promise of climate tech in addressing challenges at the local level, the vital role of subnational leadership in fostering climate resilience, and the power of diverse voices coming together to champion a shared vision for our planet. We hope the event has inspired fresh perspectives on Malaysia's commitment to sustainability, driving impactful action, and propelling us towards meaningful change ahead. Before you leave, we kindly ask you to share your thoughts through our feedback survey. Your feedback is invaluable in shaping future initiatives. All sessions from this event have been recorded and are available on the Climate Governance Malaysia YouTube channel, complete with time-tagged content and accompanying blog posts coming soon. And don't miss the live stream of the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku by visiting the official Malaysia Pavilion Facebook page or by scanning the QR code on the screen. On behalf of the organizing team, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers for sharing their expertise, and to all participants for being part of these vital conversations throughout the whole 9 days of this event. Together, let us continue driving change and shaping a more sustainable future. Thank you, and see you next time.